everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Danmachi Stranger from Another Star. Chapter 286 to 300, Chapter 53. Silent air hung throughout the vast space, lending the fear that came with the darkness an extra edge out of nowhere. Faint phosphorescence shone down from the ceiling, presenting a long, huge hall before Leo's eyes. That's right, a hall, not a cavern chamber. Unlike the messily shaped cavern chambers in those earlier floors, this one took the form of a neat rectangular box. The entrance was a great round passage, and from here to the deepest part of the hall ran about 200 meters, with a width of roughly 100 meters and a ceiling nearly 20 meters high, far larger than a soccer field. If this place was also a cavern chamber, then it was the largest one Leo had ever seen, and the walls, floor, and ceiling of this chamber were all formed of rough rock blocks. Only the wall on the left side was built differently, as though someone had polished it, without a single bump or seam. Stretching from the chamber's entrance all the way to the deepest part, the entire wall surface was smooth as a mirror, looking a little like a crystal-clear wall of ice, with an unnatural sort of beauty to it. So that's the wall of grief. Leo ignored the small opening below the deepest part of the chamber, his gaze fixed tightly the whole time on that crystal-clear wall. The wall of grief, hailed here as Floor 17's final barrier, a wall named by the adventurers who had reached this place and made it back alive. As everyone knew, most monsters in the dungeon were born out of the walls. To monsters, the dungeon's walls were a mother's womb, an eggshell capable of hatching life. This wall of grief was the same, and it would give birth to only a single monster. Leo stared at it for a good while, then, like a warrior setting out to war, took a step and walked slowly toward that wall. Not long after that, the party of 5, AIS, Tiona, Tyon, Lefia, and Line, all arrived together too. They stood right at the great round entrance, not entering the chamber, only watching Leo's back recede slowly, the playful mood on their faces drawing in. It's about to start. Tyon crossed her arms, already in spectator mode. Goliath, huh. Feels like it's been ages since I last got to cut that thing down. Tiona was both eager and wistful. The spawn interval should be up by now, right? Lefia, for her part, asked Line beside her in a low voice. It's up. Line answered just as quietly. Mr. Leo seems to have already checked at the guild yesterday. The last recorded subjugation of Floor 17's floor boss, Goliath, was 2 weeks ago. Goliath's spawn interval was 2 weeks. Since it had just been subjugated exactly 2 weeks ago, now, 2 weeks later, a new floor boss should be nearly born too. It's already noticed, Leo. AIS, who had said nothing the whole time, suddenly spoke this line, making everyone hold their breath. No one doubted these words of Aris's, because AIS was always like this, extremely sensitive to the presence and appearance of monsters. Even adventurers with scout-type abilities sometimes couldn't detect a monster's presence faster than AIS, so the girls, who had fought at Aris's side more than once, didn't doubt her words in the slightest. The girls all turned to look at the wall of grief together, as if they could already see the scene of the colossal thing about to drop into the world opening its eyes ahead of time, its eyeballs landing straight on Leo as he drew nearer. But just as they were observing with full concentration, a stir suddenly came from behind them. Looks like we're not late. When that voice, carrying a calm smile, sounded out, AIS and the others all froze. Captain. Tyon was the first to react, her voice turning saccharine on the spot, just short of throwing herself at the person behind her. Our Lady Reveria, Lefia cried out in surprise too. Gareth. And everyone? Tiona showed her astonishment as well. How come you're all here? Even Line couldn't help being startled. Looking closely, a whole crowd of adventurers had drawn near behind AIS and the others at some point. At the head were Finn, Reveria, and Gareth, and the one who had just spoken was Finn. Even Raoul had come along in full gear, and every single adventurer who appeared behind them was a member of Loki Familia, leaving AIS and the others greatly surprised. What? You saying us old folks can't come take a look? Gareth stroked his beard, laughing heartily. I already tried to talk them out of it. Reveria, clearly the one who disapproved of this outing, stood there sighing. AIS, Tiona, Tyon. Raoul, like a long-suffering hired hand, scratched his head and gave a slightly pathetic, sheepish little laugh. We're all really curious about Leo's upcoming fight, so we couldn't help but. The rest of them likewise, some smiling, some dodging and the others gazes as if guilty, some already turning their eyes toward the hall. All of them, after learning that Leo intended to take on the floor boss solo, had been unable to hold back their curiosity, and so had each come here as if by silent agreement, ready to witness this fight with their own eyes. As for how they came to know about it, all that can be said is that once enough people know a thing, it naturally stops being a secret. When Tiona and the others were discussing coming to spectate, they certainly hadn't gone looking for some well-soundproofed, hidden spot, hadn't controlled their volume at all. Tiona had even hopped and bounced around when she got excited, happy as could be, so it was hardly strange for a passerby to have accidentally overheard, never mind that they'd all gathered in the courtyard that morning waiting for everyone, a sight sure to draw plenty of attention. And so things turned out like this. Finn and the other two had only pieced together what was going on after seeing people leave headquarters one after another and sneak along behind Leo's group, and by then it was already too late to stop them. So the three of them simply came along too, lest something go wrong partway with this many people. Don't worry, there are still people guarding home, and the preparations for the expedition are nearly done, so even relaxing a little today is no problem. Finn smiled. It's a rare chance, so let's get a good look at what kind of astonishing performance the Familiar's future mainstay can put on. The words had barely left his mouth, the voice not yet fully fallen, when a cold snort drowned them out. It'll be plenty good enough if he doesn't end up making a fool of himself. The moment this voice appeared, the many members of Loki Familiar all shut their mouths, not daring to speak anymore. Tiona, by contrast, snapped out of her astonishment and glared at the person. "What's a smelly wolf like you doing here too?" Amid Tiona's unfriendly words, the werewolf with the lightning tattoo on his face walked out with both hands stuffed in his pockets, threw a glance at Leo as he walked toward the wall of grief, then turned an expressionless look on Tiona. "I came to see whether some small fry of a LV.2 who's got the nerve to challenge a floor boss solo really has the goods, or has just gotten an ego too big for his own good." Beat spoke with cold sarcasm. "If it ends with us having to go save him, then that'll just prove he really is nothing, won't it? You smelly wolf, I knew you were up to no good, you just came to watch Leo make a fool of himself." Tiona shot back with her hands on her hips. "At least Leo here's got the guts to come challenge a floor boss solo at LV.2. A smelly wolf like you back at LV.2 probably found even dealing with a single minotaur too much like hard work, didn't you? Who couldn't deal with a single minotaur?" Beat's mouth twitched, veins bulging on his forehead, and he said furiously, "Trash like that, back when I was LV.2 I took him down one kick apiece, then I'd do two with one punch." Tiona shot back, not backing down in the least. "Then I'd do three with one kick." Beat fired back without even thinking. "I'd." Tiona was about to say something more, but Tyon rapped her on the forehead. "What's the point of saying so much to that idiot wolf? Did you come here to pick a fight?" Tyon said it irritably, leaving both Beat, called an idiot wolf, and Tiona, rapped on the forehead, looking thoroughly displeased. "You lot, look at the time, and you're still squabbling here," Reveria said, somewhat unable to take it. "Since you've all come, then concentrate on watching the fight. Keep an eye on Leo, be ready to step in at any moment, and save him the instant he runs into mortal danger. You all hear that? Pull yourselves together." Gareth turned to look at the crowd of members behind him too. "This fight isn't only us paying attention. Take a look around, there are plenty of people watching." At Gareth's words, everyone noticed it too, that people who weren't from their familiar were starting to appear all around. These people all seemed to be preparing to head down to floor 18 or even deeper floors to make their conquests, every one of them fully armed. They'd noticed the presence of the Loki familiar crowd, and seen Leo walking slowly toward the wall of grief, and were already whispering to one another. "Isn't that Loki familiar? Why are there so many Loki familiar people standing around here? Braver, Nine Hell, Elgarm, Vanagand, Amazon, Jormungand, even the Sword Princess is here? Good grief, almost all of Loki Familiar's first-class adventurers and the core members of the Second Army are actually here? Who's that walking toward the wall of grief?" From the look of him, don't tell me he's about to go take on the floor boss. How come he's the only one going? What on earth is going on? Murmurs like these came one after another, sending a bit of a commotion through the great round entrance. How are there so many people? Lefia was dumbstruck. Well, this is the only entrance leading to floor 18. Line, for her part, could understand the sight. See that? This many outsiders are watching here. If that kid ends up in a sorry state, it'll be the whole of Loki familiar losing face. Beat curled his lip and looked at AIS2. That small fry's the one you brought back, AIS. Don't you have anything to say? AIS said nothing, didn't even spare Beat a single glance. Right now, her eyes held only that figure walking slowly toward the wall of grief. Her hand was already gripping the hilt of the long sword at her waist, her whole body taut, looking ready to charge out at any moment. Seeing this, Beat grew even more displeased, and was about to say something more when Finn stopped him. All right, that's enough out of everyone. Finn licked his thumb. My thumb's tingling faintly. It should be starting soon. Finn's voice had only just fallen when everyone present heard it. Heard a strange sound. A fairly loud cracking sound rang out. The crack made Leo stop in his tracks, and made everyone at the great round entrance shut their mouths, eyes fixed and watching. The cracking sounded again and again, and under everyone's gaze a huge fissure appeared on that crystal-clear wall like a bolt of lightning, the sound of the wall splitting open carrying on without pause. The sound grew louder and louder, like the groans and pained cries of the dungeon giving birth to a child, sending an avalanche-like tsunami of sound through the whole hall, the eardrums of everyone present keening even as the hall shook. For a moment the earth rumbled, the ceiling shedding rubble and dust without pause, and the cracks on that crystal-clear wall of grief multiplied more and more. Until, at a certain moment, a huge shattering sound rang out, and the entire wall of grief seemed to burst apart, breaking outright. Great blocks of rock flew off, collapsing and tumbling to the floor with a thunderous roar, and among them were fragments of the Great Wall. From within the fragments, a colossal thing appeared, likewise crashing to the ground and kicking up a thunderous din. Like a melon ripe and falling from the vine. Like the dust settling. Within the dust filling the air, the overly massive silhouette gradually revealed its full form, imprinting itself on the eyes of everyone present. It was a giant. A giant over 7 meters tall, its entire body covered in grey-brown skin. The giant had a thick neck and broad shoulders, mighty arms, and powerful legs. From the back of its head grew a mass of hard black hair, gleaming as if smeared with grease, the black hair reaching down past the base of its neck, yet not as striking as the crimson eyeballs on its face, each as large as a human head. Those eyeballs rolled around, then after a moment fixed on Leo, reflecting his figure. Ooh! The giant's huge mouth parted slightly, beginning to make a sound. Ooh-hoo! The sound swelled steadily, finally turning into a roar like a mountain shaking, sea-churning bellow, the wave of sound blasting outward like a gale, blowing away all the rock, wall fragments, and great clouds of dust around the giant. Leo's figure was bathed in that immense roar in an instant, the long robe on his body billowing violently. But his gaze stayed locked the whole time on that giant body, the largest monster he had ever seen, not daring to move away by even a hair. In that moment, he felt a terrible pressure. In that second, he experienced the feeling of his whole body trembling. An unprecedented warning surged violently within his heart. There was no helping it. The giant before him was, beyond all doubt, the strongest monster he had encountered since becoming an adventurer. This was Floor 17's floor boss, the Monster Rex. Goliath. The giant roared up at the heavens above the youth, savage beyond measure. 200 Power Stones for the extra chapter. Read 40 chapters ahead at patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 287, Chapter 54. 2,343 words. It's starting. It's starting. It's finally about to start. Watching that giant roaring up at the heavens and the youth, tiny as an ant yet still standing firm amid the immense wave of sound, not retreating so much as half a step, the same thought flashed through the minds of every member of Loki Familia. It really is the floor boss. Is he really about to challenge the floor boss alone? Is he insane? Wait, that adventurer, don't tell me his. It wasn't only the Loki familiar crowd. The outsiders present all broke into a clamor as well, some in disbelief, some with brows knit tight, some with mockery on their faces, some who had finally recognized Leo's identity, faces full of shock. But all of this had nothing to do with Leo anymore. Because the giant that had been roaring up at the sky had already charged at him, its huge soul crushing the ground, kicking up a tremor that shook the whole hall on the one hand, while on the other, carrying a savage momentum, it raised its great arm high. The next instant, a blow to crush everything came thundering down. The heavy great arm fell from the heavens and slammed down with a roar, and the ground, as though struck directly by a meteor, instantly let out an explosive crack, throwing up a shockwave and a gushing cloud of dust, sending rubble flying everywhere too. That blow drained the color from the faces of more than a few adventurers who had never seen Goliath cut loose, their eyes full of dread as they watched that grey-black giant. The Loki familiar crowd watched with a tightening in their chests too, and those of weaker nerve or who fretted out of concern, Lefia, Line, and Rurul among them, even let out cries of alarm. There was no helping it. Goliath was a LV.4 floor boss, and in terms of pure strength it was all but invincible below LV.5. Even a LV.5 first-class adventurer wouldn't find it too easy to put down, a strength already surpassing Loki Familiar's second army, leaving even a LV.4 like Rurul unavoidably tense. Only AIS, Finn, and the other first-class adventurers still watched it all calmly. With their dynamic vision, they naturally caught it cleanly. Before Goliath's heavy blow even landed, Leo had already shifted his footing, his form flickering, and dodged the strike. Out of the surging dust, Leo's figure abruptly shot from one corner, his whole body retreating fast, opening up distance from that huge floor boss. Light of heaven, sword of stars. He didn't hesitate, the sword in his right hand, the emerald staff drawn from who knew where in his left, leveling the staff at Goliath while he chanted rapidly. Meteor dance. A magic circle blooming with dazzling starlight unfolded before the gem atop the emerald staff, and countless thick meteors burst out from within, tearing across half the huge chamber, blasting toward Goliath. Goliath, which had only just pulled its fist out of the crater in the ground, before it could chase after the retreating Leo, was struck head-on by the countless thick meteors, blast after blast booming across its whole body. The roar swelled until it became a mountain-shaking, sea-churning bellow, and this sudden barrage of firepower blasted Goliath until sparks scattered across its whole body, its form staggering back as it let out a howl of pain. The skin on its body was blown open, blood spraying out as if it cost nothing, a thoroughly grisly sight. This scene sent the Loki familiar spectators into immediate excitement. It worked. Leo's magic wounded Goliath. Incredible. Every single one of these members who had never seen Leo fight was stunned by the sight before them. No, you're kidding, right? He actually wounded Goliath. Tiona and Tyon were taken aback too. That was Goliath, after all, classified at LV.4, yet a super-large class monster specialized in endurance, capable of reaching LV.5 in endurance ability alone. By rights it shouldn't have been possible for the magic of a mere LV.2 to wound it. Never mind that it was only an ultra-short chant magic, even the famously fearsome firepower of ultra-long chant magic shouldn't let a LV.2 leap 3 levels to wound a Goliath whose endurance ability rivaled LV.5, right? Yet Leo had done it. What did that say? That bastard. His magic's firepower can already rival LV.5. Beat, who had been watching with a cold, indifferent face, lost all control of his expression on the spot, his whole body snapping bolt upright as though he'd burst. Even Lefia, who had been watching the field with a tense face, couldn't help being stunned. Because even she had only gained magic firepower comparable to LV.5 after reaching LV.3. And yet this rotten man who pestered AIS all day long had managed it back at LV.2? How was that possible? While everyone marveled at this, only Finn, Reveria, and Gareth exchanged a glance with one another. So this is that star attribute magic Loki mentioned? Finn watched the battlefield ahead and spoke. So it really is just like Loki said. It can raise its power by spending extra mind. Gareth clicked his tongue in wonder. His magic firepower right now really has reached the LV.5 level. Reveria gazed at Leo's figure and said in a low voice, "It's just hard to say, squandering mind like this, how long he can hold out. The three familiar leaders, who knew something of Leo's situation, understood at once where that astonishing magic firepower of his came from. The Leo of today did indeed have astonishing magic firepower, but not to the degree of leaping 3 levels to wound a floor boss. His current magic firepower could at most rival a LV.4, and only a LV.4 whose abilities were all at the bare minimum across the board, nowhere near the level of rivaling LV.5. Knowing full well that this wouldn't wound Goliath, Leo had simply evaporated more than half of his own mind, not only raising the magic's output firepower to LV.5 but tacking on several dozen extra attacks, and only thus had he wounded Goliath. Acting this way naturally left Leo's head pounding, with a faint stabbing pain beginning to come from between his brows and his temples. Battered all over by the dozens of thick meteors, Goliath flew into a rage on the spot. After a roar, its big feet churned rapidly, racing toward Leo at high speed, swinging its fists. A single one of its punches could pound a great crater into the ground, throwing up dust and sending rubble flying, and even as Leo retreated fast and dodged the direct hits of its great arms, it chased after him without pause like a beast that had completely fixed on its prey, slamming down one punch after another, craters appearing one after another, the whole hall booming with constant blasts. Leo's footwork was lightning fast, his form weaving like a bolt of lightning as he dodged Goliath's swing after swing, but from his somewhat hurried and ragged look you could tell his dodging was a bit forced. Don't be fooled by Goliath's huge build, its agility wasn't actually affected much, its huge soles landing and sprinting at a speed that absolutely wouldn't fall short of any LV.4 adventurer, its fists coming down frighteningly fast too, leaving Leo able only to keep his eyes glued to its fists, using the prediction method AS had taught him to observe the trend, trajectory, and position of the descent as it raised a fist, dodging ahead of time, and only thus did he barely manage to evade. From this it was plain that Leo's abilities across the board still fell far short of Goliath, without doubt. If he had no magic, no firepower enough to hurt his opponent, then there would be only 2 outcomes to this fight, either flee in disarray, or die partway through. But even so, Leo's evasion was limited, and there were always moments he couldn't dodge. Yet every time this happened, Leo would unhesitatingly squander his mind again, releasing thick meteors straight into Goliath's body to drive it back. That's right, he didn't chant. That magic, he can actually cast it without even chanting. What kind of magic is that? I've never seen magic like that. At this, never mind the Loki familiar people, even the outsiders broke into an uproar. Magic that could be cast with no chant, forgive their shallow experience, but they really had never seen it. The elves of the innate magic race especially went wild after seeing this. Why doesn't that magic need a chant? Lady Reveria, have you ever seen magic like that? What kind of magic is that? A crowd of elves chattered noisily around Reveria, every trace of their usual grace and composure gone, Leffia among them. Reveria said nothing, gave no response, only gazing at the magic circle that appeared when Leo released his magic, as if analyzing something, her eyes full of inquiry. And by this point, Leo was already a little unable to hold on. This way of fighting, recklessly squandering mind, it feels good, sure, but it's really miserable too. Leo's vision was already going haywire and his head growing groggy, and he sighed inwardly, his right hand already sheathing the sword, fishing a magic potion out of the pouch at the small of his back and tipping his head back to gulp it down. The taste of the potion. Leo could no longer make it out. His mind was already intensely focused on this fight, with no leisure whatsoever to savor what a magic potion tasted like. But the moment the potion touched his lips it took effect at once, his previously groggy head feeling as if it had suddenly been plunged into ice water, a wave of coolness and comfort coming over him, and even that ever-sharpening stabbing pain eased considerably. Goliath's roar still went on, its great arms and huge soles still coming down without pause, shaking the whole hall while pushing this fierce battle gradually toward white-hot intensity. The fight was extremely tense, but the situation hadn't changed much, still Goliath roaring furiously without stop, chasing Leo, leaving Leo dodging in disarray while looking for chances to counter with magic. Sometimes it was a clear chant followed by releasing countless thick meteors to bombard, sometimes in an emergency it was abandoning the chant to release a single meteor to force his opponent back, and Leo dueled with Goliath like this. Though it was ragged, grueling, even somewhat fraught with danger, he held on through it all, steadily and surely racking up results, working damage onto Goliath's body. He had all but given up on close combat, fighting Goliath with magic alone. It wasn't that he didn't want to fight up close, but with abilities that could only rival a LV.3, there was simply no way to wound Goliath's LV.5 class endurance with a sword whose power didn't even reach the level of second-class equipment. Only magic, which could raise his firepower to the LV.5 level, was the one means by which Leo could harm Goliath. So Leo could only grind it down in this near-kiting fashion, until he ground Goliath to death. Of course, the result of doing this was that his mind drained faster than water from an opened sluice gate, leaving Leo able only to drink magic potions like water too, just to keep himself going. Thanks to that, with the fight only a dozen or so minutes in, Leo had already used up a full 10+ magic potions. His magic potions were being used up at almost a rate of 1 a minute, sometimes even before a minute was up, otherwise his mind's recovery rate simply couldn't keep pace with his magic's output rate. His stamina was draining fast too. Even just dodging Goliath's attacks and playing this game of chase with it was a serious drain on stamina, so the potions for restoring stamina were being used up quickly all the same. Leo had even used up 2 or 3 high potions to treat his wounds. Though he hadn't yet been hit by Goliath's attacks, the shockwave thrown up the instant Goliath's great arms slammed down would send him flying from time to time, rolling along the ground in disarray, and the flying rubble and debris would cut his skin and strike all parts of his body, leaving him bruised or bleeding all over. A chunk of rubble shot toward him like a bullet, suddenly striking Leo before he could dodge, hitting him in the forehead. NGH. Leo's forehead bled instantly, his form giving an almost imperceptible jolt, a brief stall appearing. Not good. Seeing this, Finn, Reveria, Gareth, and the others all contracted their pupils at once. And in that very instant, Goliath's roaring great fist came thundering in. Amid the loud crash of impact, Leo was at last struck dead on by Goliath's great fist, his whole body knocked flying like a rubber ball, smashing into the wall and crashing it to pieces. Leo. Mr. Leo. Tiona, Tyon, Lefia, Line, and the others all went pale at once. Damn it. Even Beat couldn't help his face changing, his feet tensing, nearly bolting out on reflex. He might detest small fry, and find Leo an eyesore, but to sit by and watch a familiar comrade die under a monster's fist unmoved, he wasn't of so base a character as that. And if even he was like this, then all the more so for AIS. The hand gripping her sword hilt had already drawn the blade, and though she hadn't charged out, the air around her churned as though stirred up by a sudden gust of wind. Looking closely, a faint black sheen surfaced in those clear golden eyes of hers, as if some pitch-black flame were burning, turning her aura extremely dangerous. 200 Power Stones for the extra chapter. Read 40 chapters ahead at patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 288, Chapter 55. 2,422 words. Cough. Sliding down from the shattered wall amid the dust-choked rubble, Leo's footing stumbled, and he coughed up a great mouthful of blood on the spot. His body felt as if it had been ground to pieces, wave after wave of violent pain crashing through him, almost dropping him to the floor vomiting blood. This is a little bad. Feeling the searing pain coming from every part of his body, Leo couldn't even tell how serious his injuries were now. How many of the bones in his body were still intact? How many of the organs inside him weren't ruptured? He didn't know. All he knew was that right now he was barely holding his battered body up by sheer desperate willpower, keeping himself from collapsing outright. A LV.4 floor boss, and a superlarge type at that, its full power blast of a strike. Forget Leo, a third-class adventurer whose ability values just barely rivaled LV.3. Even a LV.5 first-class adventurer taking one of these head-on, unless they were someone like old Gareth with hide so thick and tough they'd trained their endurance all the way to S, would have no chance of walking away unscathed. This was without question a grave injury, and one capable of killing. If not for the cushioning effect of the battle clothes and robe he wore, which gave him a certain degree of protection, Leo was certain he'd already be lying in a pool of blood right now, never to rise again. Grua. Goliath was still roaring there, its bellows turning into wave after wave of sound that rattled the whole chamber. It violently stomped the floor to pieces and charged at Leo, as if to put him in his grave here once and for all, mercilessly slamming its great fist down again, making the people watching from outside the chamber either cry out in alarm or lean forward, ready to rush into the arena to save him. Still too much for him, huh? Even Finn murmured this, raising the spear he'd been gripping the whole time. He too was getting ready to step in. Though Leo hadn't seen any of this, he could roughly guess what the situation was now. So he snapped his blood-drenched head up, spent the last of his grit to lift his hand, and with a roar fired off an enormously thick meteor. This meteor was bigger than any before it, so large it actually covered half of Goliath's body. Boom! With a deafening blast, the meteor struck Goliath head-on and exploded across it. Instantly Goliath's charging steps were forced to a halt, its raised fist hammered back down, the terrifying firepower of the blast lifting both its feet off the ground, the entire massive body blown up into the air, sent flying backward to slam into the floor with an earth-shaking crash. It let out the most agonized wail yet, the skin across its body bursting open, flesh festering, spraying out great gouts of blood. This wound was beyond any comparison with the ones it had taken before. The crowd, who'd been about to charge in and save him, froze. That strike just now. Gareth's brow furrowed tight. The firepower has reached LV.6. Reveria spoke the words with a grave expression. The moment they heard this, everyone present was stirred. LV.6 firepower. They were utterly dumbfounded. Tiona, Tyon, and Line stared with their mouths agape. Beat's face twisted slightly. Aris's eyes went wide. Rurul and the others were full of disbelief. As for Lethia, the expression on her face was something to behold. LV.6 class firepower spanned a full 4 levels. The instant this strike landed, the entire arena fell into dead silence. But the price of this strike was Leo's vision going black, almost losing consciousness outright and slipping into a faint. His mind had been nearly drained dry, just a hair away from falling into mind down and being completely unable to fight on. His hands were shaking. It took everything he had to pull 4 potions from his waist pouch. Of these 4 potions, 1 was an elixir, and the other 3 were all magic potions. Leo struggled to pop the caps off all 4 and downed every one in a single go, swallowing them all. The moment the potions hit his stomach, their effects showed at once. The elixir took effect first, healing Leo's body almost by the second, mending his injuries, reconnecting his snapped bones one by one, filling in his ruptured organs one by one, slowly restoring him to perfect condition. The top-grade potion that ran 500,000 valis apiece, said to bring you back so long as there's a single breath left in you and to cure any injury, that effect really was no exaggeration, healing Leo's battered, broken body at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then the effects of the 3 high-quality magic potions began to show too, dragging the last shred of consciousness Leo had been clinging to back out of the dark abyss, and his nearly exhausted mind slowly came back to life like a withered tree meeting spring. Cough, cough. Flinging away the 4 empty bottles in his hand and wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, Leo could finally stand steady. Grew. On the other side, Goliath had finally seemed to recover as well, slowly rising to its feet, its eyes full of fury and bloodlust as it looked at Leo, drenched in blood from head to toe and yet aching to tear Leo into 10,000 pieces. All that could be said was that the last strike Leo had unleashed really, truly hurt. Though Leo had been dealing damage to Goliath all along, those wounds only looked severe. In truth, for Goliath, they weren't really all that serious. Even when Leo pushed his magic's output up to LV.5 and could deal damage to a Goliath whose endurance was specialized all the way to LV.5, that only meant he could break through its defenses. When output and defense were at the same level, even if he could break through, how serious a wound could he really inflict? And there was another benefit to high endurance, which was that the self-recovery ability was just as strong. As a floor boss specialized in endurance, Goliath actually had very high self-healing. The bit of damage Leo dealt, given just a little time, it could surely recover from. Leo himself was well aware of this, which was why he'd never stopped attacking from start to finish, kept up the output the whole time, precisely so he wouldn't give Goliath any time to heal. But this solid punch, this strike that had nearly shattered him to pieces, had already brutally told Leo that dragging the fight out was absolutely to his disadvantage as well. Goliath had thick hide and a high tolerance for error. No matter how many times Leo wounded it, as long as the wounds weren't fatal, he couldn't truly turn the tide. But Leo was different. The level gap was right there. One solid punch from Goliath landing on him and he'd immediately be plunged into a near-death corner, forced to use a precious elixir just to come back to life. And how many elixirs did he even have? So, from the very beginning, I can't pin my hopes on luck, and even less can I hold anything back. Leo walked down the rubble pile step by step against the wave of Goliath's furious bellowing. His body was a battered, ragged mess, his face all streaked with blood, but his eyes were frighteningly bright. His figure looked wretched and pitiable, yet the aura radiating off him didn't weaken but grew. His gaze, his expression, even his heart, all at this moment suddenly turned incomparably calm. Frighteningly calm. To bring it down, just same level LV.5 firepower is definitely not enough. It has to be overwhelming output firepower to deal it a fatal wound. Which means I have to push the firepower up to LV.6. But could he hold up? Just pushing the firepower to LV.5 had already been such a heavy burden, and he didn't have many magic potions left. Raising the output one more level, would he really not suddenly mind down and collapse? Could those high-quality magic potions keep up with the speed of his mind consumption? And if they couldn't, then what was he supposed to do? The thoughts flashed by one after another, only for Leo to press each of them down. There was no other way. No choice but to make it work. Because, apart from doing this, he had no second path left to choose. Firepower. He needed firepower. The power of his magic had to be raised, no two ways about it. Light of heaven, sword of stars. Leo resolutely raised the emerald staff in his hand, the gem at its tip blazing to its utmost brilliance, the magic circle radiating gorgeous starlight turning brighter than ever before, spinning round and round. Goliath seemed to sense the crisis and let out a furious roar, charging at Leo with reckless abandon. Meteor dance. Just as that massive body was about to trample down onto Leo, Leo succeeded in unleashing an immense meteor. Boom. The huge meteor struck Goliath square in the chest and blew apart with a roar, blasting it open until its flesh split, whale after whale tearing out of it. Leo felt his vision go black again, the mind he just barely restored most of drained dry once more in an instant. Again Leo fished 3 magic potions from his waist pouch and gulped them down in one go. Light of heaven, sword of stars. Leo chanted the magic with a roaring, screaming intensity. Meteor dance. The huge meteor shot out again, striking Goliath's massive body without fail, blasting it away while also vaporizing its skin, exposing the raw red flesh beneath. This time Leo didn't even give himself the chance for his vision to go black. The very instant the magic was successfully released, he immediately fished out 3 magic potions and tipped his head back to gulp them down. Meteor dance. The huge meteor fired out a 3rd time, and the instant it exploded the entire chamber shook. Meteor dance. No one could see what Leo did anymore. They could only hear him let out an even more throat-tearing roar, firing off a 4th huge meteor that blasted Goliath away. After this strike, Goliath's pained wailing had turned completely into screams of agony, the flesh on its body vaporized by the astonishing firepower of the magic, leaving its chest cavity, bones, organs and the rest all exposed directly to the air. Thanks to this, everyone saw it, a huge blue crystal sitting in the position of Goliath's chest. That was the magic stone, the life core of all monsters. It was precisely because of the power supplied by the magic stone that the monsters of this world could maintain their existence. In other words, that was also the common weakness of every monster. What became of a monster that lost its magic stone, every adventurer in the world knew. That was, it turned to a drift of ash. In this moment, every single member of Loki Familia clenched their fists. In this moment, everyone watching the battle held their breath. They watched that wretched yet unfalling figure, watched him stand blood-spitting before the screaming giant, and a vast emotion rose up in their hearts that they couldn't suppress no matter what. Go. Whoever they were, friend or foe, in this moment everyone, as one, followed that vast emotion in their hearts and let out this single cry. Even Finn, Reveria, and Gareth, the 3 familiar leaders, or Beat, who'd never gotten along with Leo, couldn't help shouting it out too. Only Ais, her golden eyes gazing at that back, let out a faint murmur. Leo! The cry and the murmur both, in this single second, reached Leo's ears with perfect clarity. So Leo took out every last magic potion he had and poured them all into his mouth. Meteor dance. A roar enough to drown out every other sound in the place rang out all around. Before the emerald staff Leo had raised, a magic circle a full twice the size of the ones before burst open, spewing out starlight. That starlight scattered the endless darkness, lighting up the entire far end of the 17th floor, the blinding glare even seeping out from the large round entrance. The people standing at the entrance watching the battle didn't even have time to react before they were swallowed by the intense light. Boom! And inside the entrance, within that vast, sprawling hall, an earth-shattering roar erupted, making the entire 17th floor shudder violently. The walls were cracking. The rubble was tumbling down. The dazzling meteor, as if it could split heaven and earth, while radiating a glare no one could look at directly, struck that giant that stood towering like a nightmare. Bang! The struck giant couldn't even get out its final wail before its whole body gradually crumbled, shattered, and was annihilated in the intense starlight, making the huge magic stone at its chest let out a loud cracking sound and blow apart outright, scattering into shards across the air. This sight, no one could see. But when the intense light faded and everything at the scene fell utterly silent, the spectators who timidly opened their eyes and instinctively struck protective postures could no longer find any trace of that giant. The giant hadn't even managed to leave behind a drift of ash, vanishing directly into the starlight. All that remained at the scene was a piece of tough hide drifting down from the air, and Leo, still holding the pose of his raised staff, not moving at all. People stared blankly at this sight. People gazed dumbly at all of it. No one spoke up in those first moments, and no one could make any move in those first moments either. Time passed like this for who knew how long, until Leo's body gave a slight sway and toppled toward the floor. He only felt his whole body go weak, his mind unable to hold out any longer, and he sank into darkness. But before he completely lost consciousness, Leo saw a streak of gold sweeping toward him. That color, brilliant and lovely. 200 power stones for the extra chapter. Read 40 chapters ahead at patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 289, Chapter 56. 2,437 words. That day, the whole of Orario was thrown into an uproar once again. So many of Loki familiar heading into the dungeon together, and at a time when no expedition was due, was already eye-catching enough on its own. But once the people who had watched Leo's fight against Goliath on the 17th floor came back out and spread word of that battle, all of Orario went up like a pot boiling over. Loki Familiar's newly minted LV.2, the adventurer rumored to have leveled up in under a month, took down a floor boss solo. Leo Eligos, an adventurer of Loki Familiar, single-handedly subjugated Goliath, the floor boss of the 17th floor. A fight across 2 whole levels. Challenging a floor boss. The strongest familiar, Loki Familiar's new pillar of support. Reports like these spread at an astonishing speed, stirring up a commotion no less than the one half a month ago when Leo had leveled up. Countless people heard the news from others' mouths, and just as many felt shock, doubt, and disbelief. Soloing a floor boss across a 2-level gap, and pulling it off. You're sure that's something a single human could do? You're sure no one else from Loki Familiar stepped in, that the challenger was just 1 LV.2 from start to finish? It's not that I don't want to believe it, it's just that this is too ridiculous, isn't it? Voices like these popped up in every corner of Orario, proof of just how astounded people were. Naturally, people's first reaction was disbelief, taking it for nothing but a rumor, the result of exaggeration. But this time, compared to the last time when Leo leveled up, the degree of doubt was far lighter. Because, unlike the record-breaking level-up speed that no one could personally confirm, Leo's fight against the floor boss had plenty of witnesses. They came from all sorts of different familiars. Some were members of big familiars, some were members of small familiars, and some were hired supporters and the like. Their differing origins made it impossible that all of them had colluded with Loki Familiar to tell such a colossal lie. So, under the absolute certainty and word spreading of these adventurers who had seen that battle with their own eyes, people's doubts naturally fell apart on their own. At that point, it was simply impossible for Orario not to be in an uproar. People were stunned, clamoring, making a racket, confirming the news they'd heard all over the place, bringing back the same lively scene as half a month ago. The former had shattered the world's fastest level-up record, and by such a margin that it was enough to send the whole lower world into an uproar. The latter, while not quite reaching the point of drawing the entire world's attention so quickly, was, for the citizens of Orario itself, if anything even more impactful. The reason was simple. The astonishing feat of soloing a floor boss and successfully subjugating it was, as said before, something no one had managed to do until now. Even Freya Familia's king only beat the floor boss half to death back then before having to retreat in defeat, right? Who'd have thought that superstar of Loki Familia would actually do it? And the king's attempt was a LV.7 against a LV.7 floor boss, at least a challenge between equals. This time it was a LV.2 against a LV.4 floor boss, a full 2-level gap. After all these years, someone's finally able to subjugate a floor boss alone again. Yeah, before Loki Familia and Freya Familia rose to power, this was something only the monsters in those two old familiars could pull off. The gods gathered together and chatted away, every divine face filled with eager fascination and excitement, looking like they wanted to run straight over to Loki Familia's home base and poach the man right now. For the gods, eternal and unchanging, what they craved most was entertainment, the unknown, anything that could bring them a thrill. The heroic deeds of the lower world were what they prized most, because those great deeds were, even in their eyes, worthy of admiration and interest. The people of the lower world longed for the birth of a hero, hoping someone could save them from dire straits, subjugate every monster, and save the world. The gods longed for the birth of a hero too, hoping to witness a peerless epic legend that would bring a little entertainment to their tedious divine lives. So whenever a miracle like this appeared, one worthy of admiration, worthy of excitement, worthy of being moved, worthy of marveling at, even in their eyes, they would often be even more stirred up than the people of the lower world. By the time the guild had been alerted, had gathered evidence from all sides to confirm the truth of the matter, and had made it public, neither god nor mortal had any heart left for their own affairs. They rushed back and forth without rest, racing to tell one another, making the commotion the matter caused grow ever fiercer. Merchants began writing letters, carrying this incredible event out beyond the city. Bards likewise took to the streets one after another, singing and praising this great deed. Leo Eligos, that name was carved even more deeply into everyone's hearts that day. Countless people murmured the name in silence, sending Leo's popularity and reputation soaring at a speed that left people dumbstruck. And all of this, Leo still had no idea about. After his desperate fight with Goliath, he had fallen completely unconscious from mind down and been carried back to the home base by Loki Familia, sleeping like the dead. That sleep lasted a full day and night. When he woke again, the first thing he felt was nothing other than the dull ache still throbbing in his head. ATSS. In a room carrying a touch of cool, crisp air and the smell of wood smoke, the moment Leo woke up in bed, a sudden, stabbing pain shot through his head and made him suck in a sharp breath through his teeth on the spot. My head hurts so bad. He couldn't help pressing the spot between his brows, his forehead tightly furrowed. His face wasn't pale, but it carried a visible look of misery. Only after he'd finally eased the headache a little, or rather managed to adapt to it, did Leo realize he was already back in his own room. This is. Looking at the familiar room, Leo turned the events over in his mind while enduring the headache. As he thought it over, Leo finally succeeded in waking all the memories from before he passed out. That's right. I was challenging the floor boss. Leo shot upright, and the result was an even sharper pain in his head that nearly made him clutch it and lie right back down. There came a click, and the door to Leo's room opened. Someone walked in from outside. Leo. The newcomer was holding a tray laden with water and food. The moment he saw Leo sitting up, his face broke into a look of delighted surprise. You're finally awake. He immediately rushed over. Raoul. Leo got a clear look at the newcomer and called out his name. It was indeed Raoul. The core figure of the Second Army, so valued by Finn in normal times, fussed over Leo like a worried housekeeper. First he set the tray in his hands down at the bedside, then propped a pillow against Leo's back so he could sit more comfortably. "How are you? Feeling any better?" Raoul asked with concern as he bustled about. "We went ahead and used an elixir on you to heal your external injuries, but Lady Reveria didn't recommend giving you a magic potion. She figured you overstrained your mind during the fight and put a serious load on it, so it'd be best to let you get plenty of rest. So the mental exhaustion you'll just have to recover from on your own." Hearing this, how could Leo not understand what had happened? "Was it you all who brought me back?" Leo kneaded his temple and asked Raoul. "That's right." Raoul nodded, then scratched his head and laughed. "We did all come back together, but the moment you passed out, it was AIS who rushed out first and caught you. On the way back, I was the one carrying you on my back, getting you to your room. Lady Reveria came by here twice to check on you. As for everyone else, well, they all came to see you at least once, and left once they confirmed you were okay. Oh, right, Loki came by too. She told the few of us to take good care of you, keep an eye on you, and said that if you woke up, you should head over to her place." Hearing this, Leo sorted through his thoughts while confirming the current situation. "So, my challenge really did succeed, right?" That one line from Leo got Raoul completely worked up. "Yeah, you did it. You subjugated a floor boss all by yourself. It's just unbelievable," Raoul said over and over, waving his arms about. "That was a floor boss, and 1-2 whole levels above you, a supermassive monster specialized in endurance, no less. And the result? You blasted it to death with magic. You don't even know, this whole thing's caused a huge uproar in Ororio already. People everywhere out there are bringing up your name. You, right now, you're as famous as AIS and the others. When it came to this, never mind Raoul, everyone in Loki Familia couldn't help getting excited. There was no helping it. The feat of subjugating a floor boss alone was simply too glorious. Especially since this was a feat that even Freya Familia's king supposedly hadn't managed to accomplish, yet someone from their Loki Familia had pulled it off. That raised the reputation of all of Loki Familia along with it. You have to understand, although Loki Familia and Freya Familia were jointly called the two great powers of Ororio and shared the title of strongest, the relationship between the two was not just bad, it was downright terrible. As the saying goes, one mountain cannot hold two tigers. Both being exploration-type familiars, and both carrying the bearing of rulers standing above all, Loki Familia and Freya Familia were in competition across every front and every field. The opposition and conflict between the two sides had always existed, and that relationship of antagonism could be traced all the way back to several decades ago when both sides were first rising to power. Finn, Reveria, even Gareth included, all the senior veterans had at one point crossed blades with the upper ranks of Freya Familia. For that reason, Freya Familia was both Loki Familia's rival and its hostile familiar. Aside from a few times when the two sides had jointly schemed over major matters, the rest of the time was basically spent competing and opposing each other. The people of Ororio often compared the two as well, each picking a side, supporting whoever they thought was stronger, forever measuring the two sides' strength against each other. Under such circumstances, being able to come out one head above Freya Familia naturally left the people of Loki Familia overjoyed. You could say Leo's deed this time had given the Familia's prestige a tremendous boost. About this, Leo couldn't care less. His purpose in challenging the floor boss had never been to raise the Familia's reputation, but for his own sake. While being able to bring about a result like this was a pleasant surprise, Leo still cared more about things beyond fame. For instance, "Where's AIS?" Leo suddenly asked. "Is she at the Familia right now?" "She is." Seeing Leo abruptly bring up their own princess, Raoul first gave a small smile, then said with a pointed air, "AIS was actually planning to wait here until you woke up, but Lady Reveria said you'd probably be out for a while yet, and Loki kicked up a huge fuss about not letting her be alone with you in the room, so she had no choice but to leave." What Raoul didn't tell Leo was that when AIS had said she wanted to stay here, a certain elf girl had jumped up on the spot, bristling, and without a word of discussion dragged and hauled her out, which was the only way they'd gotten her away. Otherwise, with Aris's sometimes especially stubborn nature, if she hadn't been forcibly dragged off, there was no telling whether she'd have actually been talked into leaving. Is that so? Leo nodded and dropped the subject. In truth, he felt a little regret. According to his original plan, after successfully subjugating the floor boss, he'd intended to head back to the 18th floor once more, together with AIS. Back then, it was AIS who had brought him out of the 18th floor, so this time, Leo had wanted to bring her back there. There wasn't really a reason why. Maybe it was to reminisce, or maybe to say a kind of goodbye to that time, something like a sense of ceremony. Unfortunately, once Tiona, Tyon, Lefia and the others all came along too, the plan was already half ruined, and now it wasn't even worth thinking about, given that they'd already returned to the home base. Still, since the matter was already settled, Leo wouldn't dwell on it any further. At worst, he'd just go back another time. With his current strength, whenever he wanted to go to the 18th floor, he could just go, right? At that thought, Leo reached for his own back, but the result was just his hand coming to rest on his shoulder. What's wrong? Is something bothering you somewhere? Seeing this, Raoul hurriedly asked. It's nothing. Leo shook his head. I was just thinking, since I've already successfully challenged a floor boss, I should be able to level up now, right? At Leo's words, Raoul gave a sudden start on the spot. That's right, he'd already successfully subjugated a floor boss. No matter how you looked at it, he should have already gathered enough great deeds to level up. So that meant Leo was about to level up to LV.3? If this was only half a month later, in half a month, he could already level up again. The instant he realized this, Raoul was utterly dumbfounded. Read 30+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 290, Chapter 57. 1848 words. After spending half an hour in his room and finishing off all the food and water Raoul had brought, Leo had finally recovered a good deal of his energy. The stabbing pain in his head had eased considerably, and his body had fully recovered during the long rest. Feeling that he could already get out of bed and move around, Leo left his room at once and showed his face in front of his familiar companions, so they wouldn't keep worrying. According to Raoul, he'd slept a full day and night, and the people in the familiar had all been waiting for him to wake up. AIS went without saying, having kept an eye on Leo's condition the whole time. Loki, Finn, and the others had all been waiting for Leo to wake too, and everyone else was just as concerned about his state, which made Leo feel too embarrassed to keep lying around like a corpse. So Leo left the room together with Raoul, met his familiar companions, and felt everyone's warmth. Almost everyone in the familiar was just like Raoul, thrilled beyond words at his feat of subjugating a floor boss alone. The moment Leo appeared, he was immediately surrounded by a crowd, just like the last time he'd leveled up, and everyone was even more enthusiastic than when he'd leveled up before. Leo could clearly feel that his companions' attitudes toward him had changed a great deal. Before, even though Leo had leveled up to LV.2 at an astonishing, unprecedented speed, he was still near the very bottom in the familiar, and to many of its people he remained a junior, an up-and-comer who needed time to grow. But now it was different. Goliath was a floor boss of classification LV.4, something even a LV.5 first-class adventurer would have to put in real effort to deal with, yet Leo had brought it down while at LV.2. True, he'd done it by near-brutally blasting it to death with unreasonable magic firepower, and Leo himself didn't have the strength to face it head-on, but being able to bring down a floor boss was already proof that Leo's ability was no longer the bottom of the familiar. On the contrary, his standing in the familiar now was perhaps higher than that of many LV.3 and even LV.4 core members, somewhat like Lefia. Both of them had possessed firepower rivaling first-class adventurers while at low levels. In group battles, as long as they were protected, they could sweep the battlefield with astonishing magic power, no different in those moments from two LV.5 rearguard mags. Two such people could play a far greater role in the familiar than ordinary LV.3s and LV.4s, the kind of teammates the familiar leaders and executives wouldn't hesitate to bring along when forming a party for a raid. Under such circumstances, Leo's standing in everyone's eyes was naturally no longer what it had been. Only after finally fending off his enthusiastic familiar companions was Leo able to head to the central tower, to the God's Chamber to see Loki. So you're finally awake, kid. Loki seemed to have gotten word of Leo waking up long ago, lazily waiting in the God's Chamber for him to come find her, her face full of a sly grin. "How are you feeling? Body holding up okay? Didn't lose any important parts, did you?" The way she put that, why did it feel a little dirty? "I didn't lose any parts, my head just feels like it's splitting open." Leo answered honestly, and got nothing but a soft snort from Loki. "And whose fault is it for going that wild, kid?" Loki had clearly already heard about Leo's performance from Finn and the others, and said with a curl of her lip, "Barely LV.2 and you've got the nerve to squeeze your mind dry like that, putting out firepower across several levels. The fact that you didn't fry your brain, even I think it's a little unbelievable." "It's fine, isn't it?" Leo was at a loss for words, and after a moment said with a wry smile, "I've already got firepower rivaling a LV.4 to begin with, so I only boosted my magic's power across a level or two. It shouldn't be all that dangerous, right? And if it weren't, you think you'd still be standing here in one piece?" The look in Loki's eyes as she watched Leo was like looking at an idiot, and she said sourly, "Lying in bed for one day and night and walking it off, that already counts as your ancestors' graves smoking with good fortune." At that, Loki started laughing again. "Still, give it to you, kid, you actually pulled off subjugating a floor boss. That's something not even that lust-struck goddess's pack of lapdogs managed to do, and one of my kids did it instead. Just thinking about it makes me happy." Loki clapped Leo's shoulder smugly as she said this. "You really are my finest boy. Mama just loves you to death." At that, Leo couldn't help rolling his eyes and slapping Loki's hand away. "I'm not even gloating, so what are you so smug about?" Leo sat down in front of Loki, his back to her, and said, "You haven't forgotten why I went to challenge the floor boss, right? Of course, it was to level up, right?" Loki picked up the needle from the box beside her, and as she pricked her finger, said offhandedly, "You've already crossed 2 levels to subjugate a floor boss. Is there even any suspense left to this?" As she spoke, Loki let her blood drip onto Leo, who had taken off his shirt to bare his back, unlocking his status. The clown-patterned engraving appeared at once, and under the second drop of Loki's blood, began to give off a faint glow. The hieroglyphs started to drift. The latent excelia was drawn out, turned into nourishment, and poured into Leo's body. As the engraving shifted, Loki spoke a line in a tone of no surprise at all. "Congratulations, you're LV.3. This was a result beyond all doubt. If crossing 2 levels to single-handedly subjugate a monster Rex still couldn't get you a level up, then there'd be hardly anyone in this world who could level up at all. So Leo, Loki, and even everyone else in the Familiar had already been certain that the moment his status was updated, Leo would rise to LV.3. This was no longer anything worth getting excited about. But your haul this time is a real big one, though." As Loki translated and transcribed the new status onto the parchment, she watched Leo and said with a smile, "Not only did you level up, you also triggered a new skill." The moment she said it, Leo, until then unruffled, immediately lifted his head. "A new skill?" A look of surprise crossed his face. "Right, you heard correctly, a new skill." Loki handed the parchment to Leo and said with a grumbling whine, "This time it's finally not some weird skill I can't even read. If you'd hit me with another one of those, I was about ready to head back to heaven and retake hieroglyphs. Take a good look for yourself." Taking the parchment Loki passed him, Leo looked at his brand new status. Leo Eligos LV.3 Strength, I0 Endurance, I0 Dexterity, I0 Agility, I0 Magic, I0 Mage, H Magic Attack, I. Magic. Meteor Dance times Star Attribute. Time spending extra mind can increase power. Time spending extra mind can add attacks. Times Chant, Light of Heaven, Sword of Stars. Skill. Cannot be read. Star Soul Eternal times amplifies magic effects. Times amplifies the effect of the development ability Mage. Times strongly enhances the basic ability Magic. Star Soul Eternal. This was the skill Leo had newly acquired. Without a doubt, it was a skill just like Lefia's Fairy Cannon, made specifically to boost magic and amplify it, to make the power of magic even stronger. Your wild pursuit of firepower, kid, turned into excelia and dug up a whole new possibility, and the result was this skill. Loki clicked her tongue in wonder as she spoke. With this, our familiar's about to get one more magic idiot. The title of Magic Idiot had originally belonged to Lefia. Because she'd had firepower rivaling at LV.5 while only at LV.3, a certain werewolf had called the elf girl that, and now Leo possessed this honor too. Your firepower right now, even compared to Lefia's, should be about even, yeah? Loki gazed at Leo, a trace of a smile surfacing in the divine eyes she'd opened at some point. Now Leo was already LV.3. Though he'd only just leveled up and his status couldn't match Lefia's, who'd been training at LV.3 for 2 years, Leo had broken past the limit on his status at both LV.1 and LV.2, bringing his magic parameter to SSS twice over. Such a Leo wasn't actually all that far off from Lefia's current magic value, since Lefia's magic right now was only B. As for the development ability mage, both of them were currently at H. As for skills, Lefia's Fairy Cannon and Leo's Star Soul Eternal both had the effect of amplifying magic. While Fairy Cannon also had the effect of doubling the amplification for attack magic, Leo's Star Soul Eternal also amplified the mage development ability and strongly enhanced the magic parameter. Adding it all up, the two of them were nearly even in their advantages across magic parameter, mage level, skills, and the rest, with the only clear gap left being their equipment. Leo's Emerald Staff was merely a third-class equipment approaching second-class equipment, while Lefia's Magic Staff, the Forest's Teardrop, was a genuine second-class piece of equipment. But this level up, Leo had also gained a new development ability, Magic Attack. As the name suggested, this was a development ability that could raise the attack power of magic. Just like Star Soul Eternal, this was without a doubt the result of Leo's wild pursuit of firepower this time around. Leo didn't know whether the unreadable special skill stranger from another star had played a part, lowering the difficulty of acquiring both a skill and a new development ability, letting him gain two such precious abilities all at once. But the appearance of these two abilities had, without question, sharply raised his power in the realm of magic. Just as Loki had said, his magic firepower in its normal state was probably no less than Lefia's now, able to reach LV.5. And if he spent extra mind to push his output even higher, then not even Lefia could compare with Leo. With this new power, I don't have to worry too much about how you'll do on the expedition. Loki clapped Leo's shoulder again and spoke with a smile. Head over to Finn's place. Our little Paulum captain and our vice captain have got a whole lot to say to you. Read 30+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 291. Chapter 58. 1845 words. Twilight Manor's North Tower, Finn's office. When Leo came here again, it was the same as before, with only the three familiar leaders present. You're here. Finn sat behind a desk that had always looked too big relative to his build, and gave a steady smile at the sight of Leo coming through the door. Reveria stood at Finn's side, while Gareth sat in a chair off to the side, his position never changing. Hearing those kids out there making such a racket, I knew you had to be awake, kid. Gareth said with a laugh, turns out I guessed right, eh? The old man looked rather pleased with himself, as if he'd discussed the matter with Finn here beforehand. Are you feeling unwell anywhere? Reveria, for her part, was more concerned about Leo's body, and after taking a look at his eyes, said, from the look in your eyes, the strain on your mind probably hasn't fully cleared yet, has it? It hasn't. Leo pressed at the spot between his brows and said with a wry smile, my head's had this groggy, heavy feeling the whole time, and the mental exhaustion has been slow to clear. I'm probably not all the way better yet. That's what you get. Gareth gave a cold snort and said, and whose fault is it for going so wild this time? Even with a magic potion to replenish your mind, using and squeezing your mind that frequently still puts a considerable burden on your body and spirit. In Loki's words, the fact that you didn't end up a vegetable lying in bed for the rest of your life means someone up in heaven was watching over you. He's right, you went too wild this time. Reveria looked at Leo with a face full of seriousness and said, the power of magic is both a blessing and a calamity. Used well, it brings good fortune for a lifetime. Used poorly, it brings nothing but disaster. You must keep this firmly in mind. Coming from Reveria, a high elf and Arario's strongest mage, these words carried a natural sense of authority. Leo felt it for certain too. The power of magic was strong, that was true, but precisely because it was strong, abusing it carelessly was sure to end terribly. He had to take this lesson to heart and never misuse the power of magic again. I'll reflect on it properly. Leo nodded toward Reveria, then asked, Loki said you were looking for me? That's right. Reveria gave an affirmative answer and said, I have some things I want to say to you, but before that, let's start with Finn. That Finn was also looking for Leo was something Loki had mentioned as well. Relax, I just want to give you a few words of instruction. Finn smiled at Leo, his tone still steady and gentle. You went to Loki's place first, right? Your status has already been updated, hasn't it? Yes. Naturally Leo wasn't going to hide this, and there was nothing to hide anyway, so he said plainly, I'm already LV.3 now. None of the three of them showed any surprise at this, their expressions remarkably calm. It was the same as before. Leo had already soloed a floor boss successfully. If he still hadn't been able to level up, that would have been the strange thing. It was just. It's only been half a month, and you've already leveled up again? Finn sighed with feeling. For everyone else it gets harder to level up the further along they go. But you climbed to LV.3 faster than you climbed to LV.2. Even Reveria gave something of a wry smile. Anyway, Arario's already gotten plenty lively over this kid's business. Even if word of his level up gets out, it's not going to get any livelier. Gareth roared with laughter. Though Leo hadn't seen or felt it for himself, he knew that things outside must be very lively right now. During the fight with Goliath, he'd had no leisure to pay attention to anything else, so he had no idea so many people had been watching at the time. But after he woke up, both Ruel and the others in the Familiar had already told him about it, so Leo did know just how lively things outside had become because of him. To put it bluntly, if he showed himself outside now, he'd instantly draw a crowd of countless onlookers, and might even have gods blocking his door so he couldn't go anywhere. Unlike the uproar from his last level up, back then, even though he'd risen to LV.2 at an unheard-of speed, in others' eyes he was still just an upper-class adventurer who'd only barely shed the novice phase. So what if he grew that fast? Wasn't he still just a LV.2? This time was different. Single-handedly subjugating a floor boss of classification LV.4 was basically something only first-class adventurers had the ability to do, and Leo had done it while at LV.2 across a 2-level gap. The uproar this caused was absolutely far greater than last time. This was genuine strength, a genuine feat, more convincing than any record-breaking achievement and far more able to make people believe. If there hadn't been so many people watching at the time, so many people to testify, more than half of Orario would surely have suspected there was some staged showmanship or cheating involved. Given all this, Leo was now truly famous, his renown probably no less than first-class adventurers like AIS and the others. Of course, this wasn't the point of this talk. Since you're already LV.3, and you've got the ability to subjugate even Goliath alone, then you'll need to take part in the upcoming expedition. Finn turned serious and said, The main reason I called you over this time was to let you know, so you can prepare yourself. Hearing this, Leo perked up too. An expedition? He could finally take part. Over the past year, Leo had lost count of how many times he'd watched the Familiar's elite forces head off into the dungeon on expeditions, and how many times he'd wondered because of it whether he too might become one of them someday. Now, he was finally no longer the one who could only stand among the crowd and watch the receding backs of the expedition force. You're already LV.3, so even going by level alone you're qualified to join the expedition force, never mind that you're no ordinary LV.3, kid. Gareth stroked his beard and looked at Leo. With your magic firepower, you'd be more than enough even joining the core of the Second Army. To leave you behind to hold down the Familiar would be a tremendous waste. There are still a few days before the expedition officially begins, so spend them preparing yourself properly. Finn smiled faintly. Restore your mind, and get a firm grip on your post-level-up abilities. That's the only task I'm giving you before the expedition. All the preparations are already in order, so we don't need your help. Just focus on getting yourself into good condition. It's best you don't go into the dungeon again. There are only a few days left anyway, so getting your body back in shape first is the most important thing. Finn really did seem to have called Leo here just to give him a few words, and made his instructions in a somewhat naggy manner. All right, I'll do that. Leo had no objections, and nodded to it all in agreement. Since the expedition was only a few days away, then not going into the dungeon was fine by him. Restoring his mind first and getting his condition adjusted to the point of being foolproof, that was the top priority. After leveling up, his body and spirit had probably fallen a little out of alignment, and he'd need to make some adjustments too before he could fully bring out his post-level up strength. Over the next few days, he had to focus on getting all this done in order to meet the coming expedition and its unknown challenges. That's all I had to say. Finished, Finn looked toward Reveria. Reveria took the cue and walked over in front of Leo. Next is my turn, Reveria said, come with me. With that, Reveria walked out of the office. Though puzzled, Leo gave a bow to Finn and Gareth, then followed Reveria and walked out of the office. Finn and Gareth watched the two of them leave, and spoke with a laugh. Wonder how far Reveria will take it. Getting eyed by that prickly elf, that kid's in for a rough time. Leo was completely unaware of Finn and Gareth's teasing. He just followed behind Reveria, walking onward, with no idea where she meant to take him. The members they ran into along the way all greeted Reveria respectfully, the elf members especially bowing to her one and all like loyal retainers. When they saw Leo trailing behind Reveria, they gave looks of surprise mixed with scrutiny. Reveria didn't ignore the members they passed either, responding to everyone's greetings with a bearing that could only be called elegant and dignified. Though she most likely wasn't doing it on purpose, that figure of hers really did have the air of royalty. And so, led by Reveria, Leo arrived at a certain place. The archive. It was a room with the scent of wood drifting through it. The room was crammed with bookcases, not only covering every wall but with cases set up in the central space as well, all filled with books and parchment. This was Loki Familiar's archive, a reference room that all members were free to enter and browse. It held not only all sorts of books related to Orario and the dungeon, but also many ancient tomes from ages past and records the Familiar's seniors had made during their adventures, even professional reference books for adventurer classes like mags, and sometimes a few used grimoires got tucked in there too. Leo was no stranger to these. Over the past year, he'd gathered a fair amount of material here too, finding everything from maps of every dungeon floor to the intelligence needed for clearing them. Here, sit down first. Reveria led Leo to a desk where they could sit facing each other, while she herself took several books down from the shelves before sitting across from Leo. What are these? Leo looked at the books, somewhat puzzled. Seeing this, Reveria spoke. These are the books you'll need to read going forward. Every one of them concerns magic. They're instructional texts on magic. These words froze Leo right there. Instructional texts on magic? Leo's confusion wasn't eased in the slightest. After witnessing your battle with the floor boss with my own eyes, I noticed a problem. Looking at Leo like this, Reveria weighed her words, then said, "You don't know how to use magic at all. Read 30+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 292, Chapter 59 An Earth. 1835 words. You don't know how to use magic at all." When those words left Reveria's mouth and reached Leo's ears, he froze where he sat. I don't know how to use magic at all. He'd never expected to get an assessment like this from Reveria, of all people. But coming from an elf, born of a natural magic race and royalty among them at that, Orario's strongest mage, those words weren't without reason. The way you use magic is just taking it and using it raw. It's like handing a sword to someone who's never studied swordsmanship. Even if that sword is a divine blade that cuts through iron like mud, all he'll do is hack around wildly. Reveria said this in her unhurried way, and it gave Leo at least some understanding. You're saying, my command of magic is weak. His words earned a nod from Reveria. Magic is a power, but it's also a discipline. People need proper technique to wield weapons, and naturally it's the same for us when we use magic. Even though the magic granted through the Falna differs from person to person, most of the techniques for using magic are shared. When we use magic, how to convert mind more efficiently and load it into the spell, how to chant the incantation so we can control the magic better and cast it faster. All of these things have their knacks to be found. The mags of ordinary small familiars naturally have no such knacks to learn. They can only feel their way forward on their own. But we're different. Riveria pointed at the collection of books in this archive as she spoke. Our Loki familiar has only existed for a few decades, but many of our seniors once walked this path of magic, myself included. Everyone summed up a great deal of experience through exchanging knowledge and learning from one another, and that experience is a treasure left to you up-and-comers. We left all this accumulated experience and technique here, hoping you'd be spared a few detours. Take Lefia. She's still studying here even now, combining what she learned in the school district with what she's found here, constantly refining her own ability in magic. You may have only one spell, and an ultra-short chant at that, but the magic skill you showed in your fight with Goliath was simply too poor, so I want you to study this properly. Then, like a strict teacher, Riveria began breaking down the problems that had surfaced in his battle with Goliath. His conversion of mind into magical firepower wasn't clean or efficient enough, and after triggering the magic, he hadn't chosen to rein it in, instead letting it blast away wildly like a horse off its tether, wasting a great deal in the process. With the firepower you displayed back then, even just LV.5 would have been enough to deal Goliath a fatal wound. You didn't need to push the firepower higher at all. Doing that was pure waste. Even though Goliath is an endurance specialized floor boss, LV.5 firepower is plenty to deal with it. The reason you didn't do much damage to it is that all you can do is hurl your magic out and blast away. If you'd kept the magic reined in the whole time, you could have made its force far more concentrated, far more dangerous. This scattered your otherwise outstanding firepower too fast and too wide, so it couldn't form much damage at all. That's the single biggest problem you have right now. Hearing Riveria put it this way, Leo had no comeback. At the time, he'd kept feeling his firepower wasn't enough, thinking LV.5 firepower could only deal a fatal blow to a Goliath whose endurance had likewise reached LV.5, which was why he'd had no choice but to go all in and push his output up to LV.6. But now that Riveria pointed it out, Leo immediately realized how laughable that idea had been. Magic wasn't like the blades in an ordinary adventurer's hand. It was the trump card, the hole card, the killing move, a supernatural power that could decide victory the moment it was unleashed. That was why so many people pursued it, craved it, and why its standing in this world was so high. The moment you mastered magic, your entire capabilities became something different. That was common knowledge. Magic firepower of the same level couldn't deal a fatal wound to defense of the same level. That was simply a joke. Just like when Leo had first been LV.1, with all his status values sitting at 10, able to adventure only on floors 1 through 4 of the dungeon. Yet because he possessed magic, he was considered to have enough for the upper floor region. That proved that even firepower at the LV.1 level, his magic could clear out monsters all the way through the upper floors. As long as he didn't run into LV.2 monsters, even his LV.1 magic could deal a fatal wound to every monster classified as LV.1, even ones with bodies as hard as rock like killer ants and hard-armored. That was the worth of magic. Even against an enemy a level higher, the power of magic could still deal effective damage, it just wouldn't be as fatal. That was exactly why people prized magic so highly. And yet, even when Leo brought out LV.5 firepower, he didn't even have the ability to deal a fatal wound to a monster whose endurance alone had reached LV.5. Even if that monster was a super large class floor boss, there was no question it was a bit pathetic. That was why Riveria couldn't stand to watch, and had dragged him here to give him a lesson. Also, you should learn techniques like concurrent chanting. Otherwise you're really wasting the convenience of that star attribute magic of yours. Riveria went on, saying, I've never seen star attribute magic, but I can tell more or less that the structure of this attribute's magic is very stable, with a lot of freedom and strong controllability. Once you acquire the mage development ability and gain the assistance of a magic circle, you should be able to freely adjust even its direction and trajectory, won't you? It could only be said that she was every bit the elven royalty, every bit Arario's strongest mage. Riveria's eye and knowledge were no joke, and she'd seen through the essence of Leo's magic in an instant. If you can leave yourself some margin in battle, You could achieve all sorts of tactics by freely manipulating your own magic, even set traps. That would raise your odds of winning a great deal, and you wouldn't have to fight in such a sorry state. This time, Leo could relate to the problem Reveria pointed out. He wasn't a reckless brute, and he knew very well how hard and how deadly it was to take on a floor boss 2 levels above him. So before the battle began, he'd actually designed plenty of tactics, planning to pull them off with magic he could freely control. For instance, when Goliath charged, he'd blow up its legs or the ground beneath its feet first, creating an obstacle, so he could comfortably hide behind it and attack at range, kiting the thing to death. But as it turned out, the vision was beautiful and the reality cruel. Goliath ran far faster than Leo had imagined, forcing him to abandon chanting his magic and figure out how to dodge its charges and attacks first. While it chased him down, the momentum of those falling giant arms and the impact they caused kept scattering his focus, leaving him no room to chant his magic calmly and composed, let alone freely control it for precise strikes. He'd been pushed to the point of abandoning his chant, releasing magic even at reduced power just to stop the thing from charging and attacking. How was he supposed to precisely control the direction and flight path of his magic then? The result was exactly as Reveria said. He could only blast away with scattered magic firepower. Not only did the threat he posed drop considerably, but tactics and strategy went completely out the window. Back then his mind had been wholly fixed on how to dodge Goliath's giant arms, how to position himself, how to run. His eyes had been locked on its fists, not daring to let his attention waver at all. How was he supposed to multitask and weigh all those considerations? It could only be said that you only understood how strong a floor boss's pressure and oppressive force were once you faced it directly, standing across from it. There's nothing for it. In the end you were only LV.2. Your status fell too far short of a floor boss's, so it was hard to leave yourself any more margin. Reveria summed it up. But for a mage, leaving yourself some margin so you can use magic calmly is an extremely important thing. Even if you've cast yourself as a magic swordsman, you still have to learn this. That's why I brought you here. Reveria pushed the books she'd taken from the shelves, one after another, in front of Leo. These are all books I picked out based on your current situation. The content recorded in them is, I think, the most useful for you at this stage. Try to finish reading them before the expedition begins, then study with me for a day or two and master all the knowledge in them. That way, I can promise you your ability with magic will undergo an earth-shaking change. Saying this, Reveria didn't hide the expectation in her words. She didn't tell Leo that it was precisely because of his battle with Goliath that she now thought very highly of him. She felt that Leo's talent for magic was perhaps higher than her own and Lefia's. The number of spells he had fell far short of hers and Lefia's, but those things could be made up for. The magic and firepower he could adjust at will were the most precious thing of all. As long as the foundation of his magic was laid down, letting him fully bring out his magical ability, then even if he didn't charge into the fray as a magic swordsman and only served as a rearguard mage, he'd be precious fighting strength and talent not much weaker than her and Lefia. To keep this ability, this talent, from going to waste, she, an elven royal, couldn't help but step in and give him some guidance. You could say that with what she'd done today, it wouldn't be wrong at all to call Leo her student, the same as Lefia. Leo, with no idea what Reveria was thinking, only stared at the books before him, his eyes shining. All right. Without any hesitation, Leo nodded. I'll study hard. Read 30+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 293, Chapter 60. 1842 words. Once she'd explained everything that needed explaining, Reveria left. She gave Leo 3 days. After 3 days she'd come back to spot-check him, to confirm how well he'd learned. If she was satisfied, she'd personally teach Leo for a few days herself. Leo had no objections. Once he'd seen Reveria off, he immediately began leafing through those instructional texts on magic, memorizing them 10 lines at a glance. Back before he'd received the Falna, Leo naturally couldn't have done such a thing, but after 2 rank ups, his abilities in every respect had already surpassed the realm of ordinary humans, and his memory had grown enormously, a world apart from before. The Falna existed precisely to keep digging out the body's potential, to unearth the various powers a person could originally reach but couldn't actually touch, and in the process, through the miracle of rank up, to keep expanding that potential, raising one's container, bringing it to new heights, new realms. The gods called this process drawing ever closer to them, edging ever nearer to the realm where they resided, so the higher one's level, the closer one actually came to the god's realm, with even one's lifespan extending accordingly and the signs of aging being delayed. Before a miracle like that, a mere increase in memory was nothing at all, let alone since Leo was also a skilled hand at magic, and the stronger his mind, the more it benefited his memory too. In such circumstances, Leo memorized the knowledge in the books point by point at a speed his past self could never have matched, and slowly came to appreciate how true Reveria's assessment of "you don't know how to use magic at all" really was. Before he'd seen this knowledge, he truly hadn't known there were so many knacks, so many techniques, to using magic. Learning just one or two of these knacks and techniques might not open up too obvious a gap with other mags, but once you'd learned a lot of them, the advantages when using magic would grow more and more obvious, until finally a qualitative change occurred. From the books, Leo saw quite a few knacks for applying magic firepower. These knacks would teach him how to concentrate firepower better, extend the range of his magic, increase the damage, and make originally scattered magical force more lethal. If I'd learned these techniques for applying magic before all this, the fight against Goliath would definitely have been a lot easier, wouldn't it? After learning that these knacks existed, looking back at his own performance in the fight against Goliath, Leo could only feel that his past self had been exactly like a green recruit who knew nothing. It was just as Reveria said, completely taking magic and using it raw, like a reckless brute, without any of a mage's elegance or composure. Although he'd always cast himself as a magic swordsman rather than a mage, with his current ability, even specializing solely as a rearguard mage wouldn't be any problem at all. His magic firepower had already reached the LV.5 level even at base, and he'd learned even the mage development ability that only high-rank mags could acquire. Even though his number of spells was on the small side, only one, Meteor Dance was inherently very versatile, and depending on how it was used, it could do things that took several spells for others to do. So even if he gave up melee and served directly as a rearguard mage, Leo would have no problem. In fact, Finn and the others were planning to slot Leo into the rearguard position of the expedition force this time. There was nothing for it. If they sent Leo into melee, he'd be no more than a LV.3 vanguard or middle guard, and for Loki Familiar's expedition force, one more LV.3 vanguard or middle guard wouldn't be much help at all. But if they had Leo specialize solely as a rearguard mage, then he'd be no different from a LV.5 rearguard mage. After all, his output ability was right there for all to see, genuinely on par with LV.5, and depending on the situation he could even push it higher. Not putting him in the rearguard mage position would be a waste of a good thing. That was the reason Reveria had hurriedly led Leo here. Only by laying down the foundation could he properly fill the rearguard mage role, and perhaps even become the person with the highest output ability in the whole expedition force aside from her. Leo didn't know Finn and the others' plans, but this magical knowledge was too precious to him. He'd already realized that, and he took it all in without turning any of it away, working hard to memorize and learn it. During this time, a few members also visited the archive. When these people saw Leo bent over the desk studying so hard, they were quite surprised, but in the end none of them chose to disturb him. At most they'd greet him, then leave on their own. Leo, too, paid little attention to the outside world, completely immersed in the world of the books, forgetting even to eat lunch. Fortunately, he himself forgot, but someone remembered for him. Here. A pair of slender, pale hands reached out in front of Leo at one moment, sending a distinctive aroma drilling into his nose along with them. Leo froze first, then realized a familiar figure had taken the seat across from him. AIS. He let out the word, dazed. AIS had appeared before Leo at some point, her transparent eyes fixed on him, while in her hand she held out a fried snack. "You haven't eaten, have you?" the girl said softly. "I bought it for you." At that, Leo's gaze turned to the fried snack. It was a food made by coating mashed potato in flour and deep frying it, the potato croquette that showed up quite often in the original work too. Leo knew this snack counted as one of the few foods the usually desireless doll-like girl loved, the snack she secretly liked to eat on the sly. Thanks. Leo took the croquettes, breathing in the fried aroma rising off them, and smiled at the girl. I was just wondering why I hadn't seen you around. So you went out into town? AIS nodded, putting it concisely. The expedition's almost here. The weapon needs maintenance. Because even on ordinary days the girl would often slip into the dungeon whether she had reason to or not, her beloved sword saw a fair amount of use and had to be repaired and maintained regularly. Even though Ares's Desperate had the unbreakable property and wouldn't be completely destroyed, with frequent use its blade still wore down, dulling its sharpness. On an ordinary day, that bit of lost sharpness wouldn't matter, but the expedition was almost here, and the Familiar's expedition force would push down below floor 50. The monsters there wouldn't be cut even if they stood still and let you hack at them, not by a weapon lacking power. On top of that, the expedition would run long, and the frequency of combat would be extremely high, so it was best to bring your weapons in at their absolute peak condition for peace of mind. That was why people in the Familiar had recently been cutting down on their time in the dungeon and getting all their weapons repaired. I see. Leo nodded to show he understood, then bit into the croquette in his hand. The girl kept staring at Leo's movements, watching him eat the croquette, not budging at all. Want some? Looking at AIS like this, Leo found it a little funny, and teased her with the question. I don't. The girl moved her gaze away with difficulty, setting her delicate, pretty face into a blank expression as if displaying her own iron will. I've already eaten. I figured. Leo nodded along in deep agreement, then mercilessly wiped out every last croquette in his hand, drawing a regretful look from the girl. When I collapsed, you were the first to come over, weren't you? Leo finally brought up the matter from last time, looking straight at AIS, and said softly, Sorry to have troubled you, AIS. It's no trouble. AIS shook her head, meeting Leo's gaze, and said with utmost seriousness, After all, we had a promise. That was right. Unlike the others, AIS had been someone Leo invited along, specifically to back him up. AIS had kept that in mind the whole time, with extraordinary seriousness and focus. During Leo's battle she'd never moved her eyes off him, and her hand had never stopped gripping the hilt of her sword for a moment, ready to act at any time. You did it. The look in Ares's eyes as she watched Leo carried an emotion he couldn't read. Congratulations on defeating the floor boss. Just luck. Leo gave a wry smile, tapped the books in front of him, and said, See these? Reveria had me read all of them. They made me deeply aware of just how lucky it was that I managed to beat Goliath. He really did feel now that his success in defeating Goliath had come down not to strength, but to luck. It wasn't that he wanted to belittle himself. The more he understood how magic was supposed to be used, the more Leo could recognize just how reckless, how out of control his self that day had been. To succeed in defeating a floor boss with that kind of blast-away wildly style of fighting, Leo himself wouldn't believe it if you said he'd cleared it on anything but good luck. But while he didn't believe in himself, AIS believed in his ability more than he did. Not at all. AIS looked straight at Leo and said with the utmost seriousness, You're strong. In some ways, stronger than me. This was Ares's most direct thought after witnessing that battle. That brilliant meteor, dispelling the darkness, piercing through space, had been carved clearly into her heart all this time, leaving AIS unable to forget it through these past day or two. It wasn't just her. Many people remembered that scene deeply, remembered that brilliant meteor. The gorgeous starlight of that moment had lit up not only the whole of the dungeon's 17th floor, but had also shone clear through many people's hearts, leaving an impression they couldn't forget for a long while. You're already LV.3 now, aren't you? AIS brought this up. Leo confirmed Ares's words. I really envy you. AIS fell silent for a moment, then voiced her most honest words. In the span of just half a month, he'd leveled up again, grown stronger again. AIS really was envious of Leo in her heart. Don't worry. As if seeing through Ares's inner voice, Leo smiled. You'll get stronger too. AIS pressed her lips together and said nothing more. Read 30+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 294, Chapter 61. 2,628 words. While Leo soaked up Loki Familiar's precious magical knowledge, Handed down generation after generation, like a sponge, the rumors about him in the outside world weren't dying down at all. If anything, they were trending toward growing fiercer. That was probably because the news that Leo had successfully leveled up to LV.3 had been announced by the guild as well, becoming widely known. His first level up had taken less than a month, and his second had been completed in just half a month. Even though the people of Ororio had already come to look at Leo with new eyes, this news still shook them no small amount. Half a month? Is this really a level-up record a human can achieve? Everyone clicked their tongues to themselves like this. Most people found leveling up harder the further along they got, yet Leo went and reached LV.3 in even less time than it had taken him to reach LV.2. This really was just like the gods said, wasn't it? He'd secretly switched on some cheat behind the scenes. People were greatly shaken by it, but they didn't raise doubts the way they had before. After all, this time was different from before. Everyone already knew of the great deeds Leo had accomplished, knew that he'd succeeded in taking on a floor boss solo, that as a LV.2 he'd crossed 2 levels to defeat the LV.4 Goliath, becoming the only adventurer of the modern era with a publicly confirmed solo floor boss kill. With great deeds like that, never mind leveling a LV.2 up to LV.3, they'd be more than enough to level a LV.3 up to LV.4. So although people were shaken by Leo's extraordinary level-up speed, they didn't much doubt whether the news was true. He'd already succeeded in taking down a floor boss all on his own, so being able to level up seemed like an understandable thing too, didn't it? The crowd discussed it like this, and quickly came to accept the matter. Of course, accepting was one thing, but when there was something to discuss, they'd still discuss it, and when there was cause for chatter, they'd still chatter away. The feat Leo had accomplished was destined to be the hottest topic for the near future. His exploits not only spread far and wide through Ororio, building him enormous renown and popularity, but also traveled to every corner of the world by way of merchants' tongues, coming to be known by people everywhere. By now, the world already knew that an adventurer with an incredible growth rate had appeared in Ororio, that in only a month and a half he'd risen 2 levels from a body that had just received the Falna to become a LV.3 second-class adventurer, and that he'd even succeeded in taking down a floor boss solo, destroying the legendary monster Rex. Thanks to this, Leo's name had already rung out across the whole world. In terms of fame, he was now in no way beneath the many first-class adventurers, and on account of belonging to a corner of Loki familia, the strongest familia, he was even more famous than some of them. What most adventurers craved came down to just a few things, and one of them was fame. In only a month and a half Leo had come to enjoy a fame surpassing that of ordinary first-class adventurers, and this drove no end of people to envy and jealousy bordering on madness. If Leo were now in some obscure little familia, or even some mid-tier familia of no great size, then he might already have been targeted and schemed against by a great many people, gods included. Unfortunately, these plots and schemes, the moment they ran into the familiar name Loki familiar, either had to grudgingly shrink back, or were hard-headed enough to slam into a wall and get kicked right back out by a certain calf-protecting patron deity. Loki really had been smug lately. She'd walk around outside with a swaggering air like she was the biggest deal in heaven or on earth, and that smugness reportedly had quite a few gods grinding their teeth. The lousy goddess didn't know the first thing about keeping a low profile or reining herself in. She practically bragged to anyone she ran into, with lines like, "Oh dear, kids these days just love to overdo it. Turn your back for a second and one of them's gone and hit LV.3, or, how'd you know my house has got a kid who can solo a floor boss?" She was like an angler who always comes home empty-handed, suddenly landing a monster catch. The only thing she hadn't done was take Leo out for a stroll to show him off. Watching the envious, resentful expressions on others' faces filled the lousy goddess with smugness and secret glee, and when she ran into the sort whose eyes were darting around, the kind who clearly meant no good, she'd kick out at them on the spot. Her ferocious manner looked just like she was about to trigger a Ragnarok, her calf-protecting mentality laid completely out in the open, scaring off who knew how many gods harboring ulterior motives. The people and gods who didn't dare offend the city's strongest familiar could only slink away with their tails between their legs, leaving Leo, sitting in the eye of the storm, perfectly protected. So Leo studied all sorts of magical knowledge in the archive with his mind at ease, laid down his foundation, then passed the test in Reveria's spot check and earned the chance to learn from her. This high elf was utterly devoted and conscientious too. Right off the bat she began teaching Leo how to do concurrent chanting. To accomplish concurrent chanting, the first and foremost condition is that you must possess a heart of the great tree, a composed heart. A composed mindset that can stay calm under any circumstances is an essential condition for accomplishing concurrent chanting, and even high-speed chanting. Only if you can stay calm under any circumstances can you do two things at once, or even several things at once, moving, evading, defending, even attacking while chanting magic, and avoid a backfire of your magic. Then Reveria taught Leo a method of meditation that could help him quickly enter a focused state and keep his mind tranquil. If this meditation method was used skillfully, it could even aid the recovery and conversion of mind in ordinary times. Even Lefia used this meditation method now, so it counted as a kind of secret technique of their own. At the same time, Reveria would have Leo practice concurrent chanting in actual combat, having him evade her attacks while triggering his magic. She was a mage, but Reveria wasn't entirely without close combat ability. She was skilled not only in staff techniques but also in archery, and even though her close combat ability fell short of the likes of AIS, whose mastery of swordsmanship was outstanding, with her LV.6 standing she was still nothing the current Leo could go picking fights with. So with nothing but a wooden stick in hand she could knock Leo's head full of lumps, batting him around like a dog, putting him under pressure no less than sparring with AIS. But there was no denying that under that kind of pressure, it really did help with practicing concurrent chanting, and it even solved the problem of the mind-body dissonance Leo had after leveling up. Perhaps it was because Leo's frame of mind really was good and he adjusted very easily, or perhaps it was because the ultra-short chant star attribute magic really wasn't prone to magic backfires, but in only a single day Leo accomplished preliminary concurrent chanting, able to chant magic while moving. By the second day, Leo could already manage two movements at once, moving and evading. On the third day, while moving and evading, Leo could also defend against Reveria's attacks. This blistering rate of progress made even Reveria marvel. You had to understand, the most skilled practitioner of concurrent chanting confirmed so far could only manage 4 movements while chanting magic, attacking, defending, moving, and dodging, all of them. Leo had accomplished 3 movements in just 3 days, already coming extremely close to the limit of concurrent chanting. Reveria believed that with just a few more days, Leo's concurrent chanting could be fully perfected, at which point he'd likely be able to chant magic calmly under any circumstances, and never again be forced to slug it out on firepower alone the way he had against Goliath. Unfortunately, Leo was out of time. That day, Loki Familiar formally sent someone to the guild and submitted the report of their imminent expedition. First thing tomorrow morning would be Loki Familiar's hour of departure. This news spread at lightning speed, drawing countless pairs of eyes, countless lines of sight, all toward the manor known as Twilight Manor. The campaign was tomorrow. That night, before the God's Chamber on the very top floor of Twilight Manor's central tower, the members of Loki Familiar were lined up one by one, waiting for their goddess to update their status. "I'm next, Loki. Hurry up. Let's see how much stronger I've gotten lately. Hey, quit slacking and update my status already." Tiona, Tyon, and even Beat had all come here, walking into the God's Chamber in line and pestering their goddess. "Come on. Couldn't you all just come a little earlier? Why are you piling in all at once?" Loki looked at the who knew how many needle pricks that had appeared on the fingers of both her hands, her whole body trembling. She was about to lose it. From the moment dinner ended, the members had come knocking one after another demanding status updates, until her fingers were nearly pricked through. There was nothing for it. The expedition began tomorrow, and the members, men and women alike, all wanted to raise their abilities as much as possible, to meet the coming challenge in their strongest condition, so they wouldn't end up leaving their whole selves down in the dungeon over some small shortfall in ability. It wasn't that Loki couldn't appreciate the feeling, but if they were going to do one last status update before the expedition, why couldn't they have come earlier? Everyone piling in all at once had her run absolutely ragged. To this, the crowd said the following. "Course you train right up to the last second now. That's how you get the most status increase. Slack off any more and us old-timer executives are gonna get passed by that stray man who showed up later." You sit around with nothing to do all day anyway. This is the only time you're any use, so quit yapping and get on with it. Tiona, Tyon, and Beat chimed in one after another, making Loki really want to swear at them. Damn that Leo. It's all your fault. Loki knew perfectly well who the chief culprit behind this phenomenon was. Because of a certain someone's extraordinary, by leaps and bounds growth rate, over this past month plus, every single member of Loki Familia, without exception, had been spurred on. AIS and Beat included, they all dove into the dungeon every day, working harder than ever before. Especially lately, with Leo rising to LV.3 in the posture of someone who'd soloed a LV.4 floor boss, it had put no small pressure on those old-timer members. After witnessing that battle, the executives, Tiona, Tyon, and Beat, all understood one thing. That was that this person was closing in on them, and at a very fast pace. A LV.4 floor boss, and he could take down even that thing solo, which proved that man was no longer far from the realm where they stood. So whether it was easygoing Tiona, Tyon who was obsessed with their Paolum captain, or Beat who had small fry on his lips every other word, basically all of them got anxious. Without exception, a sense of urgency had welled up in their hearts, as if the moment they let up they'd be completely caught and overtaken by a certain someone they'd been treating as entertainment all along, and they simply couldn't sit idle at home any longer. Even though Finn and the other familiar leaders had already given instructions for them to rest up during the stretch before the expedition and stop going to the dungeon, they still sneaked into the dungeon, or found themselves some hidden spot to do their own training. Even AIS was like this. Forbidden from going to the dungeon, she'd quietly tuck herself into a corner to practice her sword swings, not daring to sit idle at all. Even Raoul and the rest of these Second Army members felt a sense of urgency in their hearts, watching Leo dive into the archive first thing every morning and train concurrent chanting with Reveria on top of that. A certain elf girl had even gotten into a rivalry with Leo over it, likewise getting up at the crack of dawn every day to run off to the archive and pore over books, and whenever she saw Leo training concurrent chanting with Reveria, she'd glare viciously at him in secret, then leave dejected. On account of her immaturity in mindset and spirit, a certain elf girl hadn't yet been permitted to train in concurrent chanting, and every day she focused solely on meditation and training her chanting technique, still nothing more than a stationary turret for now. Watching Leo come from behind in circumstances like these, training concurrent chanting with her own master, of course she didn't feel good about it. The result was that this elf girl secretly practiced on the sly too, and was now also in line for a status update. Loki took all of this in, which was why she was cursing a certain self-unaware work fiend. And that person soon appeared before her. Update my status too, would you, Loki? The utterly self-unaware man came into the god's chamber with a composed look and said this to his goddess. Get out. Loki twisted the corner of her mouth, pointed at the door, and cursed him out. That said, in the end Loki still updated Leo's status for him. Leo Eligos. LV.3. Strength, 10H144 Endurance, 10H107 Dexterity, 10H189 Agility, 10G235 Magic, 10F346 Mage, H Magic Attack, I. The progress this time wasn't all that big, was it? Translating the status into the common language, copying it onto parchment and handing it to Leo, Loki said this lightly. An increase of roughly 1,000 in total proficiency across all abilities, and Loki didn't even know when she'd started being able to calmly call progress of that degree not very big progress. Leo, for his part, didn't think it strange. This time I didn't go to the dungeon, I was holed up in the archive all day, and I only did some training with Reveria. To get this much growth even so is already pretty good. Leo looked at his freshly minted status, quite satisfied. He hadn't gone to the dungeon, hadn't sparred with AIS, only done some concurrent chanting training with Reveria, and to get this kind of growth as a result, there really was no reason not to be satisfied. Loki actually thought it counted as pretty good too, but she just didn't want to say anything nice to this brat. Still. Since you came over yourself, I'll give you the gift I prepared for you. With that, Loki took out a parcel. A gift. Leo blinked. The lousy goddess prepared a gift for me. Read 30+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 295, Chapter 62. 2,578 words. Leo soon learned exactly what the gift Loki spoke of was. I heard you collapsed straight into unconsciousness from mind down after you beat Goliath, so you probably don't know this, but a drop item appeared when you killed it. Leo was startled to hear that. A drop item? You mean Goliath hide? That was the most common drop item to come off Goliath, the floor boss of the 17th floor, and currently the most common floor boss drop material around. Because Goliath was the first floor boss adventurers would ever encounter, and because it just so happened to block the entrance leading down to the 18th floor, obstructing the steps of everyone preparing to push deeper, this particular floor boss had been subjugated more times than any other. And with that many subjugations, there were always chances for its materials to drop. Goliath hide was the most famous one, and although it was the most common, it was still a drop item that came off a floor boss, so its rarity and quality were without question very high. If nothing else, selling this hide would easily fetch a few million valis, and when the market was tight or demand was high it could even go for over 10 million, no less than a second-class piece of superior equipment. A drop item like that, and it had appeared after he subjugated Goliath? That really is lucky. The remark came to Leo on its own. It was good luck, all right, and Rule went and picked it up for you too. Loki snickered. I'd planned to leave it to you to deal with, since you subjugated the floor boss on your own, which makes it your personal spoils. But once I found out, I just took it for myself. And now that hide's already been crafted into armor by a master smith I trust. With that, Loki undid the parcel, letting its contents fall into Leo's view. It was a full combat outfit. The combat outfit was black all over, cut like fatigues, understated and inconspicuous, with the top and bottom both close-fitting, snug yet full of resilience, and it came specially fitted with a belt, several clasps along it that made it obvious at a glance they were for hanging weapons and waist pouches. Layered beneath the combat outfit was a hooded cloak, longer than waist length yet not long enough to cover the whole body, black in color as well, embroidered with gold stripes that lent it no small amount of elegance. Loki's voice came in right on cue. This combat outfit uses Goliath hide as the main material, supplemented with hide materials dropped from other high-level monsters. Goliath hide already has astonishing durability on its own, and it can deflect both physical and magic attacks, only it can't cancel out impact, so I commissioned the smith to remake it, using the smith's own skill along with the other materials to make its defensive performance even stronger while also letting it cancel out impact now. That cloak uses Goliath hide as its main material too, but the craft and supplementary materials chosen for it were different, giving it solid defensive performance while also resisting high and low temperatures. Neither flame nor frost can damage it. Hearing this far, Leo understood. This combat outfit was without question armor on par with first-class equipment, a piece of first-class gear. Don't go blaming me for being a busybody. The thing is, you grow so damn fast that there's no telling when you'll shoot up into the first-class adventurer ranks, and you're reckless besides. In some ways you're maybe even more of a handful than AIS. Seeing Leo look her way, Loki immediately grumbled a few times and said this. Your first expedition's about to begin, and I really do worry you'll go and get yourself killed in the dungeon by accident, so this once I took it upon myself to prepare this armor for you. With a piece of armor on par with first-class gear, your survival rate ought to go up quite a bit, right? Loki didn't say it out loud, but that was basically the gist of it, one way or another. How much is this? Leo was silent a while before asking that question. Not much. Loki gave a sly chuckle. Just 50 million valis or so. 50 million valis. Even if that wasn't cost price, it couldn't be far off. The first-class gear used by first-class adventurers, which of those pieces wasn't worth over 100 million valis? Ares's Desperate was worth 99 million valis, and this piece of special armor on par with first-class equipment was absolutely no cheaper than that. As for why Loki quoted the price at only 50 million valis, that was either because she'd haggled it down, or because the Goliath hide and those supplementary materials had all been provided by Loki herself, so the cost of the materials had been deducted. Leo wanted to say something, but seeing the look on Loki's face that said don't get precious on me, kid, he dropped the idea. I'll find a way to pay this back. Leo just said that. Loki, however, waved a hand. It's a gift, I said, So naturally I'm not taking your money. Loki said this with her hands on her hips. You subjugated a floor boss single-handed, accomplished a great feat nobody else managed, and won our familiar a loud reputation. As the head of this house I can't be too stingy, so just call this your reward. And the main material was your own spoils anyway, so really all I did was dress up your own loot and hand it back this once. It's not like you came out way ahead. As long as you take it easy and stop being so reckless, this armor should last you the whole way through. This was also what Loki and Finn and the others hoped for from Leo, that he could live a little longer, and not throw his life away on a whim. Kitting out a LV.3 member with first-class gear was a bit absurd, true, but given Leo's growth speed and his degree of recklessness, Loki, after talking it over with Finn and the rest, had decided to prepare this halfway reliable piece of armor for him after all. We don't usually talk about this in front of you, but you should know, both I and Finn and the others, we actually hold great expectations for you. Loki opened her squinted divine eyes, fixed her gaze on Leo, and curled the corner of her mouth. And these expectations aren't only from the familiar's angle, hoping you'll come into your own and become the pillar of this house. They go further, hoping for things from you from the standpoint of the whole lower world. We hope you can become a hero. The lower world's stalemate has dragged on long enough. Everyone's waiting for a hero to appear. And you've got the makings of that person. Loki spoke words she would never normally say, the expectation and longing in them so plain, so thick. If the lower world is fated to produce a hero, one who rewrites the whole world's situation, then why can't that person be my child? That was what Loki hoped for. That hope, Loki had once placed on Finn, on Reveria and Gareth, and on AIS too. She didn't think her children were any worse than anyone else's. In fact, she'd always thought her children were finer than anyone's, and felt deep pride and satisfaction in it. Now Leo had become one of the people in her heart she pinned her hopes on, and this time the hope was greater than for anyone. His absurd growth speed, that special skill still unexplained to this day, and his clearly extraordinary origins, all told Loki just how special, how singular this child of hers was. And so, Finn and the others included, the leaders of this familiar were all quietly placing high hopes on Leo. In their hearts, Leo's future was fated to surpass their own, to the point that even AIS, whom they'd always been so optimistic about, might not be able to keep up. His very existence might be the miracle this world had long awaited. The hero the people of the lower world and the gods of all the heavens had been waiting for, perhaps it was him. Of course, Leo himself didn't think he could become a hero. He knew he wasn't that great, and he knew exactly who the real hero was. Counting the time, that person ought to be arriving in Ororio soon, right? When the time came, the title of the world's fastest white rabbit would surely ring out across the whole world. But Leo didn't think he'd come up short against him. Before, he'd never have had this kind of confidence, but with the special skill stranger from another star, with the absurd progress of climbing 2 whole levels in a month and a half, if he still didn't have this kind of confidence, that would be far too embarrassing. Maybe he couldn't become a hero, but he hoped he could become the strongest. Weaker than no one, lesser than no one, he wouldn't dare claim he could shoulder the wishes of the whole lower world, but he hoped he could become the true pillar of the great family that was Loki familiar. Under Loki's gaze, Leo reached out and ran his hand over the combat outfit before him. The texture was very soft. It would surely be comfortable to wear, too. He'd heard Goliath hide was heavy, that even made into armor or items it carried no small weight. For this to feel so soft and light to the touch, it must have taken the special craft of a master smith to pull off. Armor like this really was, just as Loki said, something he could keep using the whole way through, even after Leo became a first-class adventurer one day. First-class gear was meant for first-class adventurers in the first place. To own a piece of equipment like this at LV.3, you might search all of Ororio and find only this one case. That, too, was a measure of how great the hopes Loki and Finn and the others placed on him. Does it have a name? Leo suddenly asked that. You give it one. Loki said this with a smile. Then let's call it Giant's Battle Garb. Leo settled on the name without much thought. Since it used Goliath hide as the main material, calling it Giant's Battle Garb was fitting enough. Carrying the garb with him, Leo left Loki's god's chamber and returned to his own room. Gazing out the window at the night sky, Leo suddenly found himself looking forward to it. Looking forward to the arrival of tomorrow's expedition. The next day, early morning. The weather that day was exceptionally fine. There wasn't the slightest haze in the sky, hardly even a few clouds, a clear blue sky stretching for miles. Sunlight poured down from the horizon, lighting up all of Ororio, and lighting up Twilight Manor as well. The members of Loki Familia were all up bright and early, and the moment they were up they whipped up a fervent, bustling atmosphere. Some were taking inventory of supplies, others were hauling large cargo crates around the garden, busy as could be. The Familia's rank-and-file members had all turned out, some sorting out tents, some checking the condition of various supplies and spare weapons, others organizing food, water, and all kinds of items into categories, talking back and forth all over the place as they worked, tense and excited, which made plain enough how they were feeling. The elite members about to set off on the expedition were confirming one another's status, while off to the side those who couldn't join, who could only stay behind to mind the house, watched them with envious faces, imagining in their hearts the day they themselves would become one of them. Meanwhile, in one room of one of the towers, Leo too had finished getting ready. He stood before a full-length mirror, the glass reflecting his appearance at this moment. The dragon fang sword was strapped at his right hip, the emerald staff at his left, along with 2 waist pouches holding potions, but all of it was concealed under the gold-embroidered cloak he wore. The black garb was fully donned, close-fitting, and just as soft and light as he'd imagined, not hindering his movements in the least. The impression Leo gave now was no longer that of a green newcomer adventurer fresh out of the gate, but of a warrior who'd been through 100 battles. He stood tall and straight, the black garb and cloak lending him a mysterious air, and there was even a faint quality to him of a young noble riding off to war. Looking over his own figure in the full-length mirror, Leo gave a slight smile. Everything was ready. All that remained was to set out. Leo cast one glance around the whole room, fixing its look firmly in his memory, before he left. The next time he returned would be when the expedition was over. An expedition lasted half a month at the shortest, close to a month at the longest, and Leo didn't know what state he'd be in when he came back. Maybe he'd return in triumph, crowned with glory. Maybe he'd come back in defeat, weighed down with shame. But one thing was certain, he absolutely did not want to remain down there forever. He would, without fail, come back again. Carrying this conviction, Leo walked out of the room, only to stop in his tracks as he passed through the open-air corridor. Ahead, AIS seemed to be waiting for him, standing there, her gaze fixed squarely on him. They hadn't arranged it. Even so, Leo walked up and said, with a smile, "Sorry to keep you waiting. Let's go." Leo's words earned a nod from the girl. New equipment. AIS looked at the giant's battle garb on Leo, a rare trace of curiosity surfacing in her eyes. It's an expedition, after all. Leo didn't say much either, answering that with a light chuckle. AIS nodded as if she understood, and stepped over to Leo's side. The two of them left the tower together and came out into the courtyard. Leo. AIS. Over here. Tiona seemed to have been waiting for them this whole time too, and the moment she saw them she waved happily. Where's the captain? Why isn't the captain here yet? Tyon, meanwhile, waited anxiously for the man she'd set her heart on. HMPH. Beat leaned against a tree with his arms crossed, watching the freshly equipped Leo and the AIS following close at his heels, and gave a displeased cold snort. Rurul and the rest of the members watched Leo come walking up alongside AIS, their eyes lighting up with something between envy and anticipation. Soon enough, Finn and the other two made their entrance together. Move out. The Paolum captain didn't waste a single word, just swept his hand wide and gave the order. A cheer erupted, and the force left their home base. Destination, Babel. Read 30+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 296, Chapter 63. 2,445 words. Central Plaza, before Babel. In this open expanse at the city's heart, where all 8 of Arario's main streets converged, a great throng of adventurers had already formed early in the morning, setting off a surge of heat through the crowd. Fully armed adventurers arrived one after another, people of every race among them, but today, unusually, they didn't head straight into the space beneath Babel and down into the dungeon. Instead they stood along the edges, lingering, their eyes fixed on one group. That group was none other than Loki Familiar, come down from their home base at the city's northernmost end. They'd come to Central Plaza by way of North Main Street, stopping at a spot some distance from Babel's North Gate, several large cargo crates loaded with equipment and supplies pushed along with them, and atop the crates flew the emblem famed throughout the lower world, the banner of Loki Familiar, a flag painted with the image of a clown. That banner had drawn the eyes of nearly everyone as it came. The passers-by on the streets went without saying, but heads also popped out of the alleys in every corner to watch them from afar, and figures stirred behind the windows of building after building too, some townsfolk and residents, some adventurers, some adults, some children. In short, everyone in the city had their attention on these few dozen people. Some were chatting with one another, some gazing up in excitement, and others cast looks of envy and jealousy, the full range of human feeling on display. Loki Familiar's expedition is starting again. It's finally starting. You think they'll make it to an unexplored floor this time? Who knows? Last expedition the floor they reached was already level with Freya Familiars anyway. The 58th floor, In all of Ororio, the only familiars that can reach that kind of deep floor territory are Loki Familiar and Freya Familiar. If Loki Familiar can reach the 59th floor on this expedition and break into unexplored territory, then they'll be one step ahead of Freya Familiar. The people discussed it like this, and there were even gods among the discussants, looking for all the world like they were chatting away with the crowd in high spirits. You'd have thought they were on the best of terms if you didn't know better. Of course, more of the gods were searching for the human who'd lately set all of Ororio abuzz. Where's that kid called Leo? He's the boy standing with the sword princess, isn't he? So that's Leo Eligos. TSK, the kid who climbed 2 levels in just a month and a half to reach LV.3, and pulled off a solo kill on Goliath while still LV.2. Why isn't a kid like that in our familiar? Right. That bastard Loki, her luck's just too damn good, isn't it? The gods all climbed to the tops of trees, or up to the upper floors and even the rooftops of the surrounding buildings, gazing from afar at Leo standing beside the golden-haired, golden-eyed swordsman, their eyes holding both heat and longing. Besides the gods, plenty of the townsfolk and adventurers had their attention on Leo too, pointing and murmuring about him. I didn't expect it, the Leo Eligos from the rumors is actually this young. Didn't the guild publish his information ages ago? He's only 16 this year. Soloing a floor boss at 16, isn't that just cheating? What's the big deal? Look at Loki Familiar's executives, aren't the Sword Princess, Amazon, and Jormungand all 16 too? And they're all LV.5. No, there's no comparison there, is there? Right. Those 3 received Falna from childhood. I hear that pair of Amazonis sisters were already LV.2 at 5, and the doll princess became LV.2 at 8. They've been training all the way until now, almost 10 years gone before they got to this point. Nothing like Leo Eligos, climbing 2 levels in a month and a half, growth speed absurdly fast. He hasn't even got an alias yet, has he? No. I hear that before he received his Falna, that is, a month and a half ago, the latest Donatus had just finished. So he's got another month and a half to wait before he gets an alias. Wonder what kind of alias it'll be. LV.3 already and still no alias, that's just absurd. The people sighed like this, casting looks at Leo full of curiosity, envy, doubt, scrutiny, and even ill will. Leo naturally noticed those stares, and his brow knit ever so slightly. Are you all right? Seeing it, AIS asked quietly. I'm fine. Leo shook his head. I'm just not used to being stared at, that's all. I get it. AIS nodded with full understanding. I've never gotten used to it either. In a sense AIS was even more conspicuous than Leo, drawing even more attention, so it was no wonder she said that. But there was no helping it. The aura on her was in no way inferior even compared to Leo's, more dazzling, if anything. The strongest female swordsman in the city, a first-class adventurer, and a beauty to rival a goddess, every one of those was a byword for popularity, never mind several of them stacked together. So even though it wasn't the first time she'd been stared at, AIS still felt uncomfortable. "We'd better not stay together, or we'll stand out too much," Leo said with a wry smile. "Tiona and the others should be coming to find you soon anyway, so go on back to your own squad first." The dungeon had one characteristic: the deeper you went, the larger each floor's area became. The 5th floor was about as broad as Central Plaza, but once you reached the 40th floor, its area was enough to equal the whole of Ororio. Some floors along the way might not fit this characteristic, but in principle the dungeon could still be thought of as a conical structure, broadening the deeper you went, and conversely, the closer a floor was to the surface, the smaller it was. In view of this, when a large familiar conducted an expedition, they often needed to split the flow, breaking the team into several squads and entering the dungeon in batches, so as not to cause congestion on the more cramped upper floors. That would not only be unwieldy but would also make dealing with monsters a great deal of trouble. On top of that, forming a long line in an enclosed space like the dungeon was itself a breach of etiquette, so every time Loki Familiar ran an expedition they followed the custom of splitting the force into 2 groups that entered the dungeon one after the other, then rendezvousing on a broader floor decided beforehand to reorganize into one unit. For this expedition, Leo and AIS had been assigned to different units. AIS was assigned to the first unit, the Vanguard, the unit that would handle any abnormal situations that might arise along the route and scout the path as much as possible for the members behind them. Leo was assigned to the second unit, the follow-up unit, which had more personnel than the first unit Vanguard and was responsible for hauling supplies and spare equipment. The first unit was usually the main fighting force, because they needed to ensure that the follow-up unit and the supplies required for the expedition could advance safely, so it was led by Finn the captain and Reveria the vice-captain, with first-class adventurers like AIS, Beat, Tiona, and Tyon all in it, an extremely formidable lineup, and besides them there were many core members of the Second Army like Raoul. The second unit was led by the one remaining first-class adventurer, Gareth, with rearguards and supporters made up of mags and healers like Lefia and Line folded into it, Leo among them as well. As said earlier, for this expedition Leo had been folded into the team in the capacity of a dedicated rearguard mage. So he, Lefia, and Line were all in the second unit, setting out only half an hour after the first unit AIS belonged to had entered the dungeon. "Then I'll head over first." AIS looked at Leo and said softly, "I'll wait for you on the 18th floor." The rendezvous point for the 2 units was on the 18th floor, which served as a safe floor. It was also the place where Leo and AIS had first met. "Right." Leo looked back at AIS, his gaze gentle. The look made AIS a little shy, and she actually ran off somewhat flustered, which gave Leo an inward chuckle. "Me." The next second, a cold snort sounded beside Leo, and the chuckle he'd been holding inside surfaced right onto his face. Flirting with Miss AIS over there again, how detestable. A certain elf girl holding a long magic staff had appeared at some point, muttering under her breath in a way that gave the impression of some pretty nasty cursing. "Mr. Leo." Line had come over too, showing Leo a bashful smile, her manner far better than a certain elf girl's. "I'll be in your care going forward, you too." Leo greeted the girls with a smile. He was a mage in the rearguard unit this time, Lefia was also a mage in the rearguard unit, and Line, even more so, was a healer and supporter who needed protecting at the back, so even after rendezvousing on the 18th floor, the 3 of them would operate from the same position. Lefia especially, her team position was right beside Leo, the 2 of them entirely side by side. Clearly, Finn and the other familiar leaders had arranged it this way on purpose. After all, both were mags whose firepower reached LV.5, their importance as rearguards almost second only to Reveria, who was LV.6. Once a battle broke out, their positions would be the closest to Reveria too, so much so that you could call them Reveria's left and right hands, the team's second source of firepower. I'll be cheering Mr. Leo on from a position even further back. Line clenched her little fists and said this. "In your care." Lefia, on the other hand, responded somewhat sulkily. The moment she thought about how the other party was now LV.3 just like her, and had even caught up to the firepower she was proudest of, Lefia got the feeling that a whole world had passed. A month and a half ago this man hadn't even received his Falna. In a month and a half he'd just caught right up to her, plain as that. This man really was the nemesis of her life. Lefia was both depressed and indignant, to the point that her cheeks unconsciously puffed up. Watching this, Leo found it tremendously funny, and couldn't resist reaching out a finger to poke the girl's puffed cheek flat. Eep! Lefia let out a small little shriek at once, then said angrily, "Don't go touching a girl's face whenever you please. You rude oaf. What? Don't tell me you've got the same hang-up as other elves about not letting people you're not close to touch your body." Leo was amused. "Aren't you a sociable elf?" "Who's a sociable elf?" Lefia got even angrier, glaring fiercely at Leo and hollering, "I don't want to socialize with you at all." Why does that line sound a little suggestive? Leo wanted to tease Lefia a bit more, but Finn's voice suddenly rang out. "Attention, all personnel." Finn stood at the very front of the force, his unexpectedly resounding voice making everyone turn to look at him. The noise in the plaza dropped all at once too. Not only did Loki Familiar's people fall silent, but the other adventurers instinctively lowered their voices as well, listening to the Paulum captain's address. "This expedition is about to formally begin. Next, the vanguard led by myself and Reveria will set out first, and the follow-up unit will stay close behind Gareth, bring all the supplies, and enter the dungeon half an hour later. As planned from the start, we'll rendezvous on the 18th floor, then push straight through to the 50th floor in one go. Apart from necessary rest and making camp along the way, we won't stop. We have only one goal, and that's the floor no one has reached to this day, the 59th floor." The Paulum captain, unlike his usual calm and gentle impression, made an impassioned declaration. The declaration was like lighting a fire. Not only did everyone in Loki Familiar quietly clench their fists, even the onlookers were struck dumb. Watching the flames kindle in everyone's eyes, Finn gave a slight smile despite himself, then returned to his composed demeanor. In the Familiar he was not only the captain but the commander, the strategist, a brilliant tactical mind who could rank in the top 3 even in Rio, holding second and contending for first. Ordinarily he could be gentle, could be kindly, but on an expedition he had to be calm, rational, and when necessary turn cold and ruthless too, or a single misjudgment might lead to heavy casualties. Now he had put on the mask called Familiar Leader, put on the crown called Captain, showing the side of him that was a leader at the top. "You are all the elite of Loki Familiar, the very best who could rank among the foremost even across the whole lower world. Even if the road ahead is riddled with hardship, that absolutely cannot stop our advance. Follow me, and let's go conquer the dungeon together." Finn raised the spear in his hand and shouted aloud. The next second, every adventurer in all of Loki Familiar roared at the top of their lungs. That was the signal of battle. That was the horn of certain victory. "Move out." His rallying of morale done, Finn parted the crowd together with the vanguard's main fighting force and, treading with strong, powerful steps, walked into Babel. Ais was right there in the ranks. She spared a glance for Leo, who saw her off with a smile, then put on the mask called Sword Princess too and stepped coldly into Babel. "It's finally about to begin. Lefia and Line murmured beside Leo, their faces tightening at the same time. "Everyone get ready. We set out in half an hour." "Yes." Behind them, Gareth was likewise giving orders in a loud voice, making the rest of the members respond in unison, their voices ringing out. Read 30+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 297, Chapter 64. 2,599 words. The dungeon, the 18th floor. As the first safe floor adventurers visited in the dungeon, the 18th floor was utterly different from the floors that came before it, and from the floors deeper down as well. This floor had another name too, Under Resort. As the name suggested, it was a resort within the underground labyrinth. Not only did it spawn no monsters, but the scenery stretching out before the eye was exceptionally beautiful, nothing at all like being underground. If adventurers came to this floor, the first thing they saw was a forest. The entrance to the 18th floor lay in the passage cavern on the south side, and just ahead of the cavern was this forest. If you crossed the forest and headed north, you'd come upon a vast grassland with crystals scattered all about. This emerald field, spreading out across the floor's central region, was magnificent, and at its heart stood a giant tree called the Central Tree, with a hollow at its roots that was the entrance down to the 19th floor. To the north of the grassland was a grand wetland zone. From south to east, the whole stretch was verdant forest. To the west lay an azure lakeshore and a great island floating on the lake's surface, with rocky cliffs encircling the entire floor, so that at a glance you could tell the whole floor was circular, giving the impression of an enormous landscaped garden. And the source that turned all of this into beautiful scenery was the light, enough to drive away the darkness of the whole underground world and make this place into a complete resort. Yes, there was light here, and it was very bright, bright as day. This light all came from the crystals scattered throughout the floor, and on the ceiling especially, countless crystals grew densely packed together, forming a crystal jungle. These blocks of white crystal gathered together like an underground sun, the light they gave off lighting up the entire floor directly, forming daylight, glittering and radiant, so that although this 18th floor lay underground, it possessed a sky all its own. The brightness of this underground sky also changed with the passage of time, forming periods like morning, daytime, and night. Though it diverged from the surface's time, and this time difference was sometimes large and sometimes small, shifting at any moment, this kind of mysterious dungeon phenomenon always captured the hearts of many adventurers. Some wealthy households would even specially commission adventurers to escort them down here to sightsee, just to see this radiant scenery with their own eyes, this nature made of dreamlike crystals and a mysterious firmament. Thanks to this, the 18th floor was not only the dungeon's first safe floor but a wonder that lived up to the name of resort. The beautiful glowing crystals could be called this place's hallmark. This kind of crystal grew in every corner of the whole floor, and even the forest was dyed indigo under the glow of blue crystals that sprouted from cracks in the ground, beautiful beyond compare. Even Leo, when he'd first descended into this world and come here, after his initial bewilderment and helplessness, had marveled at this wondrous sight despite himself. Now, at last, he had come to this floor once more, come to the place where he'd first descended. It really takes me back. Walking out of the forest, Leo looked up at that rocky firmament and crystal jungle, standing there in a daze for a good long while. Beside him, Loki familiar members pushing carts loaded with large cargo crates passed by, chatting and laughing among themselves as they walked on ahead, the mood so lively it didn't seem like they'd come to the dungeon to adventure, more like they'd come to do business in some foreign little town. This is where Mr. Leo first ran into Miss AIS, isn't it? Line couldn't possibly not have heard about Leo's story, and looking at him standing there in a daze, she asked curiously. Beside her, Lefia said nothing, but quietly pricked up her pointed ears. Yeah. Leo had never hidden the matter, and said mildly, if I hadn't run into AIS here, I might never have made it back to the surface. Or rather, if when he'd first crossed over he hadn't descended straight onto this floor but somewhere else, he'd probably have died long ago. So how did Mr. Leo get here in the first place? Line had no way of knowing Leo's inner voice, and simply found it strange. By Leo's own account, he'd been completely alone when he was here, and a body that hadn't received Falna besides, so weak at the time he couldn't truss a chicken. Forget leaving the 18th floor, even getting back to the surface from the first floor would have been a tall order. That being so, why had he turned up here on the 18th floor? He certainly hadn't had the ability to reach this floor on his own back then, so who exactly had brought him here and abandoned him? Line found it strange, and couldn't help puzzling over it. This was actually something many in the familiar found strange too, only some chose tacitly not to ask, while others had asked but never got a straight answer out of Leo. This time was the same. Who knows? Leo's tone was so detached he didn't sound like he was talking about himself, offhand. Maybe some out-of-town noble hired adventurers to bring his whole family down here for a vacation, then dumped some good-for-nothing son he couldn't stand and figured was a lost cause to fend for himself. Who's to say? This was all complete nonsense from Leo. But Line and Lefia both, their faces shifted slightly, and they fell silent. They thought this might just be the truth. How else to explain Leo appearing here alone, unable to get back to the surface, and the way he stubbornly refused to bring up his own past after AS brought him back to the familiar? Lefia and Line came to think that what Leo said now might be true, that he was someone abandoned here by his family, which was why he wouldn't speak of his past and set his heart on joining the familiar and working to grow stronger. Perhaps he wanted to prove himself, that he was absolutely no good-for-nothing lost cause, Or perhaps he wanted to throw away his past entirely and go on living in Orario as a member of Loki Familia from now on, never going back. At this thought, the way Lefia and Line looked at Leo changed somewhat. A pity that Leo had no idea his careless ramblings had led the two girls to such a wildly mistaken flight of imagination, or he'd surely have been caught between laughter and tears. "Hey, you three, what are you still standing around there for?" Ahead, Gareth, leading the group with his battle axe in hand, turned back and bellowed at Leo and the other two talking at the forest entrance. "Get over here, quick. We're going to rendezvous with Finn and the rest." At that, Leo pulled his gaze back from the crystal dome, and Lefia and Line stopped their imagining too. "Let's go, we'll meet up with AIS and the others first." Leo took the lead, heading toward the main force, and Lefia and Line hurried to follow. The group's destination was the central tree at the floor's center, and not far from there was the rendezvous point Loki Familia's 2 units had agreed on beforehand. Soon enough, Leo and the rest of the second unit caught sight of the vanguard resting there. "We're here, Finn." Gareth's booming voice was the first to ring out again, making the vanguard members, scattered about resting and chatting, all look over. "Lefia, Line, over here." Tiona had been bickering with Beat, but the moment she saw the 2 girls walking up with Leo, she raised a hand to wave them over. Tyon, meanwhile, was huddled at Finn's side fawning over him, paying no mind at all to the people coming to rendezvous. Rurul and the other core figures of the Second Army hurried over to help push the carts. "Run into any trouble?" Reveria asked that, just in case. "Of course not, we only came over to the 18th floor. What trouble could we run into?" Gareth replied, unconcerned. Though the main fighting force was all concentrated in the first unit, with Gareth the only first-class adventurer in the second unit, with their abilities, never mind the mere upper floors and middle floors, they could advance with ease even on the lower floors. The members who could join an expedition force each had their own strengths to begin with, either LV.3 and above first-class adventurers and second-class adventurers, or healers like Line, and even Line was LV.2, so even if the second unit's combat strength wasn't as strong as the first unit's, they could move freely through the middle floors even without counting Gareth, with basically no chance of running into any danger. Along the way, the number of monsters they encountered was few and far between too, since they advanced along the route the vanguard had passed through. The monsters blocking the way had basically all been wiped out by the vanguard, and even if a few more turned up later, those were just a matter of firing off a few rounds of magic to handle. Gareth hadn't even lifted a hand the whole way. The ones doing the fighting were all those LV.2 and LV.3 members, and even Line had seized the chance to club a good number of monsters to death with her magic staff, let alone Leo. Back when he was LV.2 he'd been able to cut his way in and out of the floors before the 18th 7 times over, and now that he'd risen to LV.3, he didn't even need to use magic. He'd draw the Dragon Fang sword, charge back and forth a few times at random, and slaughter who knew how many monsters. Even a Minotaur, famously powerful, reputed to be the strongest monster on the floors before the 18th apart from the floor boss, was now no match for a single exchange with Leo, one casual swing of his sword and it was instantly cut down. So the second unit had walked this whole way without any pressure, the only thing being that they couldn't use the vertical caverns to reach the floors below quickly, which slowed their progress a little. Whose fault was it that they were pushing supplies along, after all? They couldn't very well jump down a floor along with the cargo carts. Good thing there was no trouble. Finn pushed away the fawning Tyon and said to the second unit's members, "Take a rest here for now, then count the supplies over once more, and we'll set out after confirming nothing's missing." "The captain's right." Tyon chimed in unconditionally from the side, but then snarked, "Let's not have a repeat of last time," suddenly finding out a batch of supplies got left behind at home and having to go to the town to make it up. Hearing this, the whole Familiar's people took on subtle expressions. The ones who'd lived through that incident especially, every one of them couldn't help speaking up. "I don't want to go there again either, way too much of a rip-off. That time we got fleeced something awful. It's all Rurul's fault, didn't count properly and cost us a huge sum of money. That can't be blamed on me, can it?" The group went back and forth at one another, all griping about it. "The town, huh?" Leo turned his gaze west, looking toward that stretch of azure lake. From here you could clearly see that at the center of that lake was an island, towering and huge as if a corner of the continent had been cut off. That was the Lake Island, and on it stood a town. It was a dungeon in town run by upper-class adventurers who'd reached the middle floor region. The town's origins lay in a large-scale relay base the guild had once planned to set up in the dungeon to open up unreached floors more efficiently, a place that had ultimately met with failure and been abandoned because the plan was repeatedly disrupted by monster invasions from other floors, on top of the enormous expenses of large numbers of personnel and defense costs. After that, a group of adventurers had taken it over without permission and built the place up, establishing a town called Rivera, which besides shops for adventurers like weapon shops and item shops also had a buying station that traded cash for things like magic stones. Because this was a safe zone where no monsters were born, and the only town in the underground labyrinth, most adventurers exploring the floors below the 19th treated it as a base, and if they planned to stay in the dungeon long term, they needed to resupply here and offload the spoils they carried first, to free up space to keep pushing forward. Honestly, having a place like this where you could offload spoils and resupply without specially returning to the surface was, without question, very convenient for adventurers. The pity was that precisely because it was so convenient, that group of adventurers with no official backing who'd taken over and built the place up grew utterly unscrupulous. Relying on their advantage as the dungeon's only relay and resupply station, they pulled Rivera's prices up to a frighteningly high level, charging 5 figures or more for a set of trail rations or a second-hand spare weapon, and the prices on other supplies were at the very least several times higher than on the surface, simply not so much ripping people off as devouring them. But there was no helping it. That adventurers couldn't easily resupply in the dungeon was a fatal weakness, and anyone planning to push the floors below the 19th long term inevitably had to get fleeced, never mind that if some emergency left them desperately needing certain supplies to save their lives, they'd have to pay up no matter how much it hurt. In the past, Loki Familiar had once advanced this far on an expedition only to find a batch of supplies missing, and without resupplying there was no way to reach the unreached floors smoothly, so they'd had no choice but to hold their noses and shop in Rivera, getting fleeced soundly. The moment this matter came up, Loki Familiar's people were both furious and resigned, and Rurul and the others who'd been directly in charge of the purchasing at the time all wore looks of money pain, as if it were still vivid before their eyes. Hurry up and count, no more slip-ups. Finn ended the conversation and dispersed everyone to go count the supplies. Leo seized the moment and came before Finn. "Captain, can I leave for a bit?" Leo said quietly. "I want to go look at somewhere else." Finn, as if he'd seen through what was on Leo's mind, glanced at a certain girl who stood among the crowd saying nothing yet had been watching this way the whole time, and gave a knowing smile. "All right, I'll grant special permission this once," Finn said with a smile. "Just this once, though. You can't do this again next time." Leo nodded and agreed. Read 30+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 298, Chapter 65. 2,526 words. The 18th floor of the dungeon, the forest. The radiance pouring from the crystal dome scattered across this verdant sea of trees, and though most of it was blocked by the dense foliage, part of it still streamed down through the thinning gaps in the leaves, lighting up the surroundings, setting the blue crystal pillars around each tree glittering. Having received Finn's special permission to leave the group, Leo had come here, wandering through it. A year now. This place hasn't changed at all. Following that bit of memory still lingering in his mind, Leo walked through the trees, observing his surroundings while he picked out the path. Back then. I think this was the road I took to leave this place, right? Leo thought, a little uncertain, straining to scrape together memories that had already faded. He still recalled that a year ago, it was AIS who had led him out of this forest, toward the corridor cavern to the south, and then climbed up to the 17th floor from there. Now, trying to retrace the path he'd taken when he left was genuinely a bit of a struggle. After all, back then I wasn't in any state of mind to look around me or remember the way. The only thing on my mind was staying right behind AIS and getting up to the surface as fast as I could. Recalling how flustered and lost he'd been then, Leo couldn't help a small smile. Looking back on the past with his current eyes, he surely found the version of himself from then a little embarrassing. But he didn't think the person he'd been then was anyone to be ashamed of. A young man of the new century who'd lived his whole life in a peaceful world, a peaceful nation, suddenly dropped into this other world without a single soul he knew, where deadly monsters might come bursting out at any moment, and he hadn't wet himself with fright on the spot. That alone was already pretty good. Of course, if he hadn't run into Aes right away, he might have made an even sorrier showing of himself. Hope I'm not going the wrong way. Still turning over those early days, Leo kept walking deeper into the forest. As he walked, he began to come across babbling spring water and cool little streams, and here and there fruit trees bearing unfamiliar fruit started to appear. Roar! A massive bear monster appeared right there, pawing at the fruit on one of the trees, then drawn by the sound of Leo's footsteps, its gaze snapping over toward him. That's a bugbear. Leo stopped. A bugbear, a monster that only appeared from the 19th floor on, and a large category 1 at that. Its classification was LV.2, and although it was somewhat weaker than the Minotaur, which only appeared from the 15th floor on, in strength and endurance, its dexterity and agility were both higher than a Minotaur's. It could often use a nimbleness that didn't match its huge bulk to corner its prey, then tear it limb from limb, making it in some sense a more dangerous and troublesome monster than even a Minotaur. The 18th floor was a safe floor, where monsters weren't supposed to be born at all, much less a floor where bugbears appeared. But monsters did sometimes wander over from other floors, and some even used this great forest and the wetlands in the northern part of the floor as a base of operations. The bugbear was one of them. The gourd-shaped red berries growing on those fruit trees were called cloud fruit, a wild fruit produced only in the dungeon that bugbears loved to eat, so bugbears often came up here from the 19th floor for the express purpose of picking and eating it. And now Leo had run into a bugbear lurking near the cloud fruit trees. Roar! The instant the huge bear monster saw Leo, it let out a furious roar. It abandoned the fruit it had been pawing at and charged at Leo with astonishing speed, kicking up a cloud of dust, fierce and aggressive. Its speed really was faster than a Minotaur's. Once it got going, it was like a tank smashing wildly through everything, knocking down the trees in its path. Facing that charge, even an adventurer in the back half of LV.2 would probably have a hard time of it, right? Pity. The thing had picked the wrong opponent. The instant the bugbear leapt high and slammed down hard onto the spot where Leo had just been standing, raising a dull boom like an impact against the ground, Leo had already sprung up into the air. His form was like the wind. The moment he leapt, he landed on a branch of the tree nearest him, then stamped down with one foot, his whole body turning into an arrow loosed from a bowstring, shooting toward the huge bear monster. He was faster than the bugbear, and faster by a wide margin. The bugbear couldn't react to Leo's movements at all. Before it could even raise its head, a flash of sword light split the air. The sword light, cold as a wintry moon, sliced through the bugbear's hide and muscle in an instant, cut into its chest, and finally struck precisely on the magic stone in its ribcage, cleaving the stone and its entire massive body in two. The bugbear didn't even manage a death cry before its body split in two, and with the magic stone shattered outright, its slowly toppling corpse dissolved straight into ash, leaving nothing behind. And Leo, who'd brought all this about, didn't so much as turn to look. He sheathed the sword he'd drawn at some point and kept walking forward. After that he cut down quite a few more monsters from other floors, some large category, some small category like Almirage, without a single monster getting in his way. He went on like this for another half hour, until at last Leo heard the sound of water. It wasn't the sound of a stream, but a gentle lapping, like wind passing over a water's surface and stirring ripples across it. Hearing it, Leo's heart gave a slight stir, and he quickened his pace, heading toward it. At last the way ahead was no longer the same monotonous trees but opened into a clearing, a pool. It was a pool of very clean water, so clear you could see right to the bottom. The pool sat just in front of a rock face, and crystalline water flowed out of the rock, plunging into the pool like a small waterfall, forming this pool that was more beautiful, clearer, and cleaner than any water source on the surface. There were monsters about near the pool, too, heads bowed at the water's edge, quietly drinking, ignoring even Leo's arrival. Looking at the pool, Leo smiled. That's right. This is the place. The crystal water of this pool flowed out from the depths of the floor. It could not only be drunk straight to quench thirst but also heal the body's fatigue, a place only a handful of adventurers knew about. Of course, Leo hadn't come looking for it to quench his thirst, much less to heal his fatigue, but because this was the place where he'd first come into being. Leo remembered that day clearly. Back then, he had suddenly appeared above this pool, as if some unseen presence had simply flung him here, plummeting out of the air and crashing hard into the water, sinking to the bottom. The feeling of suffocation was vivid before his eyes even now, and the feeling of water pouring endlessly into his mouth and nose was even more unbearable, making him thrash at the bottom of the water instinctively. A hand had seized hold of him as he thrashed for his life, dragged him up from the bottom, and broke the surface. And then, coughing violently, Leo had been so stunned by the sight before his eyes that his pupils shrank and his head simply went blank. That sight, even now, he still often saw in his dreams. A golden-haired, golden-eyed girl, right there before his eyes, one hand gripping him, not a single thread on her body, in the wholly original state of a newborn babe. The girl's skin was pale and soft and beaded with water, her figure slender, her curves distinct, her features so exquisite they seemed of no earthly making, beautiful beyond compare. The image of her soaking in that crystal-clear water carried a breathtaking beauty, calling to mind the fairy spirits of myth who dwelled in forest springs. Leo still remembered that he'd simply stared, dumbstruck, blank. Never mind that the girl was the most beautiful person he'd seen in his entire life, just that bare, fully exposed posture of hers. Never mind a man, even a woman seeing it would surely have had her senses stolen away. To be honest, back then he'd even had the feeling that maybe he was dreaming, the thought that maybe he'd actually just drowned and everything he was seeing now was nothing but a fantasy before death. After that thought came to him, he'd even felt he could die without regret, which gives you some idea of how great an impact that sight had on him. Lost in the memory, Leo found himself murmuring that name under his breath. And the owner of the name answered him. "I'm here." The voice came from right behind Leo, jolting him sharply awake. Eos walked slowly out of the forest behind him, her gaze fixed on him the whole time, something flowing within it that Leo couldn't read. "How are you here?" Leo stared at her blankly, startled into speech. "I followed you." Eos came to Leo's side and stood shoulder to shoulder with him, saying softly, "I saw you leave the group, so I came after you." "Is that so?" Leo scratched his cheek, saying a little awkwardly, "I just wanted to come take a look here, that's all." "I know." Ais seemed able to understand how Leo felt. Watching his eyes, she said, "This is the place where we first met." "Yeah." Leo nodded and gave a small smile, his expression hard to name. "It's also the place I came to when I first arrived in this world." At that, Ais showed not the slightest sign of confusion. "Back then, I'd just come up from the floors below." Ais looked at the pool before her, saying quietly, "I was filthy, so I came here to wash off." Whenever Loki Familiar came back from an expedition, most times they would stop on this floor, and the women among the Familiar members, when they stopped here, couldn't resist coming to this spot to wash away the grime of long days of fighting and the weariness in body and mind. Ais didn't often come when she went into the dungeon alone. That day, she'd only gotten so filthy that she'd come over. And in coming over, she'd run into a strange thing she had never encountered before. "You suddenly fell out of the air, and I didn't even have time to react." Aris's tone became unlike any she'd had before, like puzzlement, and like wonder. "Even if a monster had been approaching, I'd have noticed it right away." Eos was, after all, a LV.5 first-class adventurer, with extremely keen senses. If someone suddenly came near this area, unless they were a first-class or second-class adventurer with truly astonishing stealth, there was no way she could fail to notice. But Leo was plainly an ordinary person without the strength to truss a chicken, and before he'd fallen out of the air, Eos hadn't sensed the slightest movement at all. "As if you'd appeared here out of thin air." This murmur of Aris's was covered by a light breeze that suddenly blew past, hard to catch. But Leo heard it all the same. "Do you remember what I said back then?" Leo suddenly said this. "I remember." Eos was silent for a moment, then said, "You said you didn't know how you'd come here." "Right." Leo nodded. And. Eos pressed her lips together, and her eyes as she looked at Leo turned complicated, making her expression hard to name once more. "You said you were someone who didn't belong to this world, didn't belong to this era." Leo lowered his eyelids. "It was the truth, wasn't it?" The fact was, he hadn't meant to say it that way back then. The matter of his crossing over to another world was the kind of thing best carried into the grave, never mentioned to anyone. But at the time he'd been utterly at a loss, and he hadn't dared come out and say that he was most likely someone who'd crossed over, so all he could do was stammer out that Riddler's sort of statement. Back then he'd never imagined that it was precisely that Riddler's mystic charlatan statement that had touched the heart of the girl before him, the girl who hadn't blamed him for seeing all of her, who'd saved him, and who, once he'd calmed down, had slowly asked him about where he came from. Belonging neither to this world nor to this era. Wasn't that the truest portrait of what lay in the girl's own heart? Especially Leo's eyes back then, so lost, so helpless, like a child who'd strayed into some unfamiliar place, frightened of everything around him, treading carefully, not knowing where to go, the very picture of bewilderment about the future. That look, how alike it was to her younger self from years ago. And so AIS had said it almost as a reflex. Have you got nowhere to go? That voice, lacking any rise and fall, carrying not a trace of feeling, like a puppet's, yet more lovely to hear than any heavenly music, held within it an empathy and resonance that no one had managed to notice. Then, do you want to come back with me? By the time the girl came to her senses, the words were already out. No one knew why she'd said it back then. Even the companions who'd been at her side in the familiar for years were astonished. She who, apart from getting stronger, had never taken interest in anything, had actually brought a strange boy home. And who would have known that when AIS looked at Leo back then, she was in fact, through Leo's figure, seeing her younger self. That was why she hadn't been able to stop herself from reaching out a hand to Leo. I've always wanted to say thank you to you one more time. Leo gazed at the beautiful girl beside him and smiled faintly. Thank you, for helping me find a place to belong, AIS. At that, AIS lowered her eyelids too. She said nothing, only stood with Leo, quietly gazing at the pool before them. As if seeing the two who'd met here a year ago. Read 30+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 299, Chapter 66. 2,552 words. After spending about half an hour at the pool's edge, Leo and AIS finished this remembrance that held meaning only for the two of them, composed themselves, and returned to the expedition force. By the time they got back to the expedition force, the rest period had just ended. What awaited Loki Familiar's expedition force next was a forced march. Just as Finn had said, after regrouping on the 18th floor, they would press straight to the 50th floor in one go, with no stops along the way apart from necessary rests and making camp. The 50th floor of the dungeon was also a safe floor, and at the same time it was the last safe floor before the 59th, Loki Familiar's goal for this expedition. So the expedition force would head straight there, build a stronghold, then begin planning the push to the 59th floor and launch a proper assault on the floors no one had yet reached. Thanks to all this, Leo, marching along with the expedition force, saw on the way scenery of the underground labyrinth he had never seen or reached before. The first thing he saw was the region of floors 19 through 24, the large tree labyrinth. If the cave labyrinth of floors 13 through 17 was a closed region formed of rock and caverns, then the large tree labyrinth of floors 19 through 24 was an otherworld formed of bark, moss, and plants. Here the ceiling, walls, and ground were all formed of bark, and the moss growing lushly along the passages gave off a blue or green glow, shaping a landscape like some hidden realm, with leaves of every shape and mysterious flowers dripping silver droplets visible everywhere, and plants you'd never see above ground were everywhere here too, in some sense even more spectacular than the 18th floor that earned the name Crystal Labyrinth. But the danger hidden behind this marvelous scenery was more terrifying than any floor before it. The most common things here were insect-type and fungus-type monsters, and what they did best was unleash poison-kill attacks with an enormous area of effect, their toxins far more potent than the purple moths that appeared in the upper floor region. Even an adventurer with the abnormal resistance development ability would find it hard to hold out against such virulent poison if the ability's level was too low. Bugbears and firebirds and other troublesome monsters also appeared here, the former more troublesome than even a minotaur, the latter's fire-breathing attacks more threatening than a hellhound's, especially in an environment overgrown with plants like this, where the smallest spark could ignite a whole sea of fire. It forced Finn to order all members to put on salamander wool capable of withstanding flame attacks, and to put the members with high-level abnormal resistance ability at the front as vanguards to clear the way. People like Leo who hadn't acquired the abnormal resistance development ability were placed directly at the rear by Finn, under the protection of the middle guards. But because the cloak of his giant's battle garb had fireproofing properties, Leo didn't have to put on the salamander wool and only had to release magic in coordination with the vanguard. In the large tree labyrinth, the fully integrated expedition force had to act strictly according to the prearranged plan, and Leo, designated as a rearguard mage, could no longer just charge out and draw his sword to hack away as before. Instead, together with Lefia beside him, under Reveria's lead, he used magic to cover and support the team, and when necessary had to go all out, unleashing his full firepower to clear the battlefield. It was also from here that the excessive firepower of Leo and Lefia finally found a place to be put to use. A single casual blast of magic could sweep away a great swath of monsters and scorch the battlefield, and that firepower made countless people turn their heads. Leo especially. His magic wasn't just high-powered, it could also freely adjust the number of attacks. Sometimes he fired off a single meteor, vaporizing every monster in its path. Sometimes he opened a magic circle above the battlefield and rained down countless meteors in a bombardment. He could even play tricks with the meteors, casually steering their courses, sending them dancing all over the battlefield to pick off monsters one by one, and that scene, like a grand magic performance, left who knows how many people stunned. After Reveria's instruction, Leo's ability with magic really had improved by leaps and bounds. He no longer just took it and used it, giving the impression of an entirely different person. Looks like this expedition's going to be a bit easier. Gareth even offered an assessment like that, making no small number of Loki familiar members look at this newly minted LV.3 with fresh respect. What's so impressive about that? Lefia, though, got sulky and competitive, unwilling to concede and pitting herself against Leo. Clearly she didn't want to lose to Leo, so when she chanted her magic she became especially diligent too, as if competing with him, unleashing one gorgeous spell after another. Where Lefia was stronger than Leo was that her quantity of magic far surpassed his. Leo, after all, had only the one magic, while Lefia was different. Not only were all three of her magic slots full, she could also cast other types of magic through her special third magic. The alias Thousand Elf hadn't come to her for nothing. By sheer number of spells she could use, Lefia had more even than Reveria, who was hailed as Nine Hell. So while Leo played with technique, Lefia started up a true feast of magic, releasing a dazzling array of countless spells that left no small number of people gaping again. But thanks to this, the expedition force's progress started to grow easier, and they soon walked out of the large tree labyrinth and entered the 25th floor. From this floor on, the monsters that emerged in the dungeon, both in strength and in number, grew tougher by a whole tier. Because from this floor on, it was already the dungeon's lower floor region. At present, the dungeon was divided into 4 difficulties in total. Floors 1 through 12 were the upper floors, which LV.1 adventurers could conquer. Floors 13 through 24 were the middle floors, which LV.2 adventurers could conquer. Floors 25 through 36 were the lower floors, which LV.3 adventurers could conquer. And the floors below the 37th were the deep floors, which only adventurers who'd reached at least LV.4 could attempt to conquer. Just as the danger level spiked sharply going from the upper floors into the middle floors, going from the middle floors into the lower floors, the dungeon's danger level and difficulty of conquest likewise spiked sharply. So this place was also hailed as the dungeon's second deathline, and some troublemakers even called it the New World. This also proved that the floors from the 25th on had scenery even more peculiar than the floors above. Floors 25 through 27 were a region connected by one magnificent great waterfall, the Water City. There were no forests here, only valleys or cliffs formed of crystal peaks, and a waterfall about 400 meters wide and at least twice that in height. Because of how the light reflected, the water cascading down appeared a blue jade color, so beautiful it drew the soul, beautiful enough to make you forget this was the danger-ridden dungeon. The waterfall sat thundering here amid spray that scattered like mist, flowing down to the floors below through a great hollow and running through all 3 floors. Half-human, half-bird harpies and the singer-birds, sirens, soared in the air, their high cries ringing out clear and bright, presenting this vast water paradise before everyone like some idyllic haven. Full speed ahead. Pity, in the face of such an idyllic haven the Paolum captain had only this one short order, sending everyone crossing over as fast as they could. This too was to lower the difficulty of conquering this expedition. While the floor boss, Amphispina, still hasn't reached its respawn period, let's hurry across the water city and get to the 29th floor. Gareth shouted as much too. This expedition was, for Loki familiar, on the lower end of difficulty. The reason was simple. The 4 floor bosses the dungeon set up specifically as the strongest gatekeepers against intruders, jokingly dubbed the 4 heavenly kings by the gods, were all currently in a state where their respawn intervals hadn't finished counting down. The 17th floor's floor boss, the giant Goliath, had been struck down by Leo several days ago, and its respawn interval was 2 weeks, so when Loki Familiar's expedition reached the 17th floor this time, Goliath hadn't finished respawning and couldn't obstruct Loki Familiar's advance. The 27th floor's floor boss, the Amphispina known as the Two-Headed Dragon, had been confirmed defeated about half a month ago, and its respawn interval was 1 month, so it hadn't respawned yet either. The 37th floor's floor boss, the skeletal monster Eudeus, had a respawn interval of 3 months, and when Loki Familiar made an expedition there a little over a month ago they'd thrown in their full strength and struck it down, so it was likewise currently in a period before respawning. As for the 49th floor's floor boss, the one-eyed giant Baylor, its respawn interval was a full 9 months, and about 3 months ago it was beaten half to death by Otter, the king, then finished off by Freya Familiar, which led to that Familiar's upper echelons falling into infighting and coming to blows. This was the one. In other words, this strongest floor boss, with a classification as high as LV.7, was likewise not yet respawned. All 4 floor bosses were in their respawn cooldown, and an opportunity this rare in 1,000 years was naturally one Loki Familiar wouldn't let slip. So Loki Familiar's expedition force sped across the 25th, 26th, and 27th floors, cleared the water city, and arrived at the 28th floor, the Labyrinth Garden. This was the second safe floor where no monsters were born, after the 18th floor's under resort. On this floor, which as its name suggested was a beautiful field of multicolored flowers, the force-marching Loki Familiar finally came to a halt, started making camp, ate and rested, kept watch in shifts, and spent the expedition's first night here. The next day, Loki Familiar left this labyrinth garden and entered the 29th floor. Floors 29 through 32 were a region of vast jungle different from the large tree labyrinth, the jungle ravine. Powerful dinosaur-type monsters, including blood dragons, appeared here, existences that required a level of at least LV.3 to subdue. Of course, for Loki Familiar this was still a zone they could cross easily, since even the most powerful dinosaur-type monster was no match for a single ordinary member of the expedition force. Apart from LV.2 healers like Line, everyone else could subdue them one-on-one, so it couldn't even be called a close call. They simply crossed straight through and reached the 33rd floor. Floors 33 through 36 were a new region, the Sandland. As the name implied, this was a boundless great desert zone with no complex labyrinth. As long as you overcame the sand underfoot that sank and made it hard to advance, the monsters that came bursting one after another out of the dust, and the mirage illusions that could disturb an adventurer's senses beyond all reason and mislead them off course, you could reach the 37th floor. Loki Familiar had long since prepared special equipment for this purpose, and with seasoned adventurers like Finn leading the way, this final region of the lower floors was broken through too. Along the way, Loki Familiar stopped for a night in an oasis zone where they could rest, and only on the morning of the expedition's 3rd day did they step into the 37th floor, the dungeon's true deathline, the deep floors. From this floor on, it was simply impossible for any adventurer who wasn't LV.4 to conquer it, unless they came along with an elite force like Loki Familiar's expedition. Otherwise, for the likes of a LV.2 or LV.3 to come here was nothing but a dead end. Fortunately, the 37th floor's greatest obstacle, namely its floor boss, hadn't respawned, so the expedition force crossed extremely smoothly through this floor that earned the name White Palace, and the vast labyrinth region that followed on the 38th floor was broken through smoothly as well, bringing them to the 39th floor that earned the name Ash Bridge. This too was the dungeon's third safe floor. Loki Familiar regrouped here for a while, then entered the region after the 40th floor and began the forced march once more. Next came the region of floors 40 through 43, the Giant's Graveyard, and the region of floors 44 through 48, the Crimson Mountains. The former was a hell where giant-type large-category monsters could be seen everywhere, the latter a volcanic zone where many monsters with fierce explosive flame attacks dwelled, led by the flame rock demons. Once they got here, even Loki Familiar had to slow their pace and conquer cautiously, or they too might wipe. In these two regions Loki Familiar spent a full 2 days to finish conquering, then arrived at the 49th floor, named the Great Wilderness, made up of just one colossal cavern chamber. The monsters that appeared here could only be safely dealt with when first-class adventurers stepped in, and this wilderness zone was larger than all of Orario. Even without the floor boss Baylor, it still forced Loki Familiar to go all out, conquering with full effort for a whole day before they could reach the passage leading to the 50th floor. All of Loki Familiar entered this passage and at last arrived at the final stronghold they'd settled on before this expedition. The 50th floor, the last safe floor where no monsters were born that Orario's adventurers could currently reach, and the last stronghold available to the powerful familiars active on the very front lines of conquering the dungeon. This was a great grey forest, everything in sight a thicket dyed grey, woods that looked as if a layer of ash had settled over them covering all the space, all the way to the wall at the far end. Only the rivers flowing in vein-like patterns escaped that dim coloring, giving off a blue radiance, flowing on without cease and continuing through the woods. Phosphorescent light glowed on the ceiling, not dazzling but close to dusk, enough that you weren't left unable to see. Loki Familiar set up camp on a broad rock platform 10 meters high. Amid a faint stir of noise, tents began to go up one by one, cargo crates were unloaded one after another from the carts, and people ran about all over the camp, busy at their tasks, creating a lively scene of wilderness camping. Leo. Over here. Coming. At someone's call, Leo, carrying a stack of equipment, mixed in among them and slowly walked into the camp. Read 20+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Chapter 300, Chapter 67. 1962 words. By now, above ground it had probably entered the dusk hours of evening, about to give way to night. Loki Familiar's members worked faster at putting up their tents, bringing this camp gradually toward completion. Among them, beside one especially large tent walled off with cloth curtains, a flag stamped with the Familiar's emblem had already been raised, the banner with its jester design swaying in the wind. Leo, like the members around him, hauled equipment and put up tents while greeting the people who kept passing by. "How's it going on your end, Leo? You all right? Need me to lend a hand? Let me teach you a little trick. You can put the tent up like this, makes it way easier. It's almost time to eat, so I'll go ahead and help you out." The moment members saw Leo, they'd come right over to strike up a conversation, and those with free hands would even help him out, getting his work done faster. Leo didn't turn them away either, blending right in with the crowd, laughing as he worked, fully part of it all. By the time he finished the task in hand, someone else came up to him with a grin. "Pretty popular, here, Leo. Everyone's coming over to talk to you." The one saying this was, of course, Tiona. This little angel of an Amazoness was bouncing over with her hands behind her back, bringing her face right up to Leo's and teasing him at close range. "Looks like you're slowly winning people over too. Not bad." Tyon stood at her own little sister's side, arms folded, watching Leo with a look that was half a smile and not quite. Behind the pair of Amazoness twins, AIS had come along with them too. The girl was reticent as ever, not speaking up right away, only watching Leo with concerned eyes. Leo gave the girl a small smile, then looked at the twins in front of him. "We have fought side by side, after all. How bad could it get?" Leo didn't deny being popular and winning people over. In fact, ever since he'd single-handedly struck down the floor boss Goliath in front of everyone and leveled up to LV.3 off the back of it, quite a few people in the Familiar had changed their attitude toward him. Before, it wasn't as though he was on bad terms with everyone. Familiar seniors like Raoul had always looked out for him, otherwise they wouldn't have prepared a gift for him the first time he went into the dungeon. But back then Leo was, in their eyes, ultimately just a weak junior. To put it nicely, he was someone who needed their care. To put it less nicely, he wasn't yet qualified to stand as their equal. The male members especially had long been full of resentment over this junior of unknown origin getting so close to the familiar's doll-like princess. It didn't go so far as harboring great hostility toward him, but their attitude was definitely less than friendly. But ever since Leo started to make a name for himself, especially after showing everyone at LV.2 that he had the strength to single-handedly strike down a LV.4 floor boss, a good many people in the familiar revised their opinion of him drastically. They began to take Leo seriously, to see him as an equal, and quite a few even belatedly realized they might not even measure up to Leo, so they set aside the resentment in their hearts and, as if spurred on, entered a state of cutthroat competition. Thanks to that, even though they never came out and said it, Leo knew that a lot of people had come to accept his being close with AIS quite a bit more. He'd shown everyone through facts that he was no longer the trainee without the strength to truss a chicken, fit only for logistics work, but an adventurer who could even solo a floor boss. If someone like that wasn't qualified to stand at Ares's side, then who was? So the number of people unhappy about his being close with AIS had dropped sharply by now, with only envy and jealousy left over, making them put on a sour look from time to time. And then, on this expedition, Leo's performance won over no small number of people as well. Over this expedition lasting 6 or 7 days, Leo had stayed faithfully at his post as a rearguard mage, not only displaying magical firepower others couldn't hope to match and a beautiful hand at controlling his magic, but also saving who knows how many people with that very skill. To say nothing else, just take the Great Wilderness before they reached the 50th floor, where the expedition force came under assault by a huge horde of monsters. The vanguard warriors were nearly overrun by that massive, powerful pack, and some that slipped through even broke through the middle guard's line, reaching the rearguard's position and launching an attack on the mags and supporters. In that sudden assault Leo cut loose completely, casting aside even his chant, instantly calling up countless brilliant meteors to dance across the whole battlefield. The countless meteors flew about erratically, some falling from the sky and slamming down to blast away a great swath of monsters, others curving around his companions one by one as if alive to strike the monsters poised to attack others, killing who knows how many on the spot and saving everyone who'd come under attack. That display of powerful magical firepower and magic showmanship completely won over everyone in Loki Familiar. On top of that, Leo's performance all along the way was likewise full of highlights, plenty to praise, leaving no small number of people sighing that they fell short. That was how this scene came about. There's just no denying that having fought side by side really is different. It makes it easy for bonds to grow. That was exactly where Leo stood now, the recognition he'd earned in the familiar growing greater and greater, enough to make plenty of people show him goodwill. Of course. A certain wolf still can't be bothered with you, though, can he? Tiona stuck out her tongue at Beat, who was putting up a tent with a thoroughly bored look on his face. Luckily he didn't see it, or those two would definitely have gotten into it again. Tyon, though, had a different take. That dumb wolf really is still wearing a sour face, but didn't you notice he hasn't come picking fights either? Tyon, dependable and level-headed about everything other than a certain Palum captain, said this with a pointed edge. Other people don't get that treatment, you know. Leo glanced over in Beat's direction too. During the expedition, he'd seen plenty of times the people in the party getting chewed out by that werewolf, and the kind of merciless, ugly tongue-lashing at that. These people had either made some low-level mistake in battle that nearly caused a problem in the line, or suddenly run into danger and nearly lost their lives. At times like that, Beat would often step up and chew them out savagely, as nasty as it could possibly get. Even Raoul had been on the receiving end. His face had gone white from it, his whole body curled up and his head pressed down low, all but ready to burrow straight into the ground. Under those circumstances, that Leo, the so-called small fry Beat had always looked down on, hadn't been targeted even once this expedition, which really was strange. Leo, for his part, knew the score, knew why Beat acted this way. This thoroughly unlikable werewolf had cursed people out plenty, but nearly everyone he'd cursed out had been helped by him. When someone made a mistake that nearly caused a problem in the line, the one who'd immediately rush up to fill the gap was Beat, and the people who'd suddenly run into danger and nearly lost their lives were the ones Beat had saved too. This werewolf cursed people, sure, and was off-putting, sure, but the moment something went wrong somewhere, the moment anyone ran into danger, he was the one who charged in fastest. That, really, already said a lot. Pity, the little angel Tiona couldn't see any of this. He just hasn't found an opening, that's all. If he does, who knows how badly he'll tear into you. Tiona, without the slightest reserve, hugged Leo's arm and said with childish innocence, "You'd better watch out for that guy, Leo. He's definitely looking for a chance to corner you on the sly." Leo didn't respond to this. Out of the corner of his eye he looked at Ais and found her staring at that arm of his being hugged by Tiona. Feeling oddly guilty about it, Leo gave a dry cough and worked himself free of Tiona without making it obvious. "Where are Lefia and Line? How come I don't see them?" At that, Tiona didn't think much of it and spoke up with a grin. "They're cooking." Tiona pointed in a direction, and Leo looked along it. Over there, a large pot was set up over a pile of campfires, and Lefia, Line, and the other girls were gathered around it, adding ingredients, now and then giving it a couple of stirs with their utensils, clearly in the thick of cooking up a storm. Just then, Ais finally seemed to work up her courage and came over. "You're not hurt, are you?" The girl didn't care in the least whether Leo was popular or not, didn't make any fuss over whether he'd won recognition either, only checking on Leo's condition, wanting to know if he was all right. "Of course not." Leo shook his head and smiled. "With all of you protecting me up front, I'm perfectly safe." This wasn't flattery, but the truth. With Leo's LV.3 strength, after reaching the deep floors he'd completely lost the standing to fight monsters in close combat. This place was full of monsters classified at LV.4, with even LV.5 classified monsters visible everywhere. If Leo swung a sword at one, he probably couldn't so much as get through its defenses, and might well get slugged to death by one punch. Here, he was a mage who could only be useful under the protection of the Familiar's members, with only an outstanding hand of magical firepower to bring to bear. Without the Familiar members protecting him, there was no way he could keep fighting in a place like this. Of course, this wasn't a bad thing for Leo. Because every single monster here was stronger than him, everyone he struck down earned him a massive amount of Excelia, and he'd probably even accumulated no small amount of the high-grade Excelia that came from achieving great deeds. When facing an opponent stronger than yourself, a group of people whose strength falls short cooperating and joining hands to strike the enemy down, that too could earn the high-grade Excelia used for leveling up. Even if the Excelia gained this way got split among everyone in the party, it was still the best means for the weak to rely on to defeat the strong, and far safer than venturing alone. Most adventurers actually honed themselves this way, slowly building up high-grade Excelia and leveling up by it. People like Leo before, who'd beaten powerful foes in solo combat and leveled up off it, were the rare few instead. Leo was thinking just then whether, once he got back from this expedition, he might be able to level up again. He was looking forward to it. Read 20+ chapters ahead on Patreon, patreon.com/nearxd. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.